You're watching Noir Street. I'm your host, Nero Wolfe. Every story hides a secret, and every shadow hides a clue. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe, tap the like button, and join us as we drift into mystery. Chapter 1. Fog on Riddle Street on a Tuesday evening in March, when New York had turned itself into a wet grey package tied up with fog and string. I was at my desk in the office on West 35th Street, trying to persuade a sheet of paper to look as if I had earned my salary that day. Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms with Theodore, where he belonged from 4 to 6, and Fritz was in the kitchen conducting one of his private treaties with a duck. The house was running as it usually ran, with each citizen occupied at his specialty, and with me, as usual, handling the parts that involved telephones, doorbells, and other evidence that civilization had gone too far. The rain had started before noon and had settled in for the night. You could hear it at the windows, not in a splashy, ambitious way, but as a steady, insinuating whisper, as if the sky were trying to tell the city something and the city had no time to listen. By 6 o'clock, the lamps along the street had made little yellow islands in the murk, and the brownstone fronts across the way looked like old men pretending they weren't damp. I had just got to the point in my notes where I was considering whether a client's contradiction had been deliberate or merely congenital when the doorbell rang. I arose, went to the hall, and opened the front door. A woman stood there under the stoop light, with rain in the fur collar of her coat and in the brim of a small black hat that had the good sense not to be fashionable. She was not beautiful, but she had a face that would make you look twice and a mouth that suggested she had won arguments against heavy odds. She was in her middle 30s, perhaps, and the first thing she did after I let her in was to remove one glove, not to shake hands but to press fingers hard against the inside of her wrist, as if checking that her pulse was still there. "I must see Nero Wolfe," she said. "You and half of Manhattan," I told her. "Name, Julia Raines. The weather is against you, Miss Raines. Mr. Wolfe sees no one on business during his beer." She looked at me as if I had said no doctor could examine a stabbing until after his cocoa. "A man has been killed." I shut the door behind her. "That often improves the priority." "Who?" "Ben Belden. He was found there less than an hour ago, in his office on Riddle Street." That could have been enough to get attention, but there was more in her voice than excitement. There was outrage, and beneath it something else, something colder. A person can be frightened for herself or for another. And if you hear enough of it, you learn the difference. This was neither. This was the sound of a woman who had just discovered that the universe had played dirty with arithmetic. "Come in," I said. "Wipe the rain off and keep what's left. I'll see what can be done." I took her to the office. The yellow shades were drawn, the big desk lamp was on, and the room had its usual look of comfort with authority laid over it. The red leather chair for clients faced Wolfe's desk like a confessional with better upholstery. She sat on the edge of it and did not remove her coat. I mounted to the first floor, crossed the hall, and opened the door to the dining room. Wolfe was there, already installed before the silver warming tray, with Fritz behind him. The beer glass was on the table, and the first course had just been put down. "No," Wolfe said before I spoke. "A woman named Julia Raines, murder." He moved his eyes from the plate to me. "Whose?" "Win Belden, Riddle Street." He took a sip of beer. "I do not know him." "You may, broker." "I do not. She says she must see you at once." "Foo, if he is dead, delay cannot injure him." I turned to Fritz. "How's the duck?" "Perfect," Fritz said with dignity. "That settles it," I said to Wolfe. "You can safely postpone the Republic and hear a woman whose pulse is performing gymnastics in the office." He lifted his chin a quarter inch. "Archie, you mistake impatience for urgency. A common error." "Yes, sir, one of my commonest. She says the body was found less than an hour ago." He attacked the duck with a fork and knife as if they had insulted him. "Then it will still be dead in 20 minutes. Bring her coffee if she wants it." That was that. I went down again. Miss Raines was standing now, not from impatience, but because sitting had become impossible. Her gloves were on the desk, neatly arranged, which told me something good about her. A woman in a panic doesn't line up gloves unless the panic is caged by discipline. He'll see you, I said, after a duck has yielded its secret. She stared. Is that a joke? Only an outline. Sit down, coffee. Number good. Fritz would be hurt if you drank it too fast. She didn't smile. I sat at my desk and gave her a look that said I was not official, but could be useful. You know the dead man? I asked. Yes. How well? I worked for him. In what capacity? I was his secretary for 3 years. I left 6 months ago. On good terms. Number that was crisp enough to earn another look. Yet, when he's murdered, you come here. Yes. Why not the police? I have spoken to the police. Then why us? Because Inspector Kramer may be excellent, but he will see first what is put in front of him. Mr. Wolfe, I am told, looks for what has been polished. I like that. Who told you? My brother once hired Mr. Wolfe for a business matter. She stopped. I let it wait. People often improve. If you don't pounce the second they hesitate. Your brother's name? Leonard Rains. I remembered it dimly, attached to a dispute over patent rights and an inventor who had preferred lies because they were quicker than diagrams. All right, I said. Start with the corpse. She sat again and clasped her hands tightly enough to whiten the knuckles. Edwin Belden had offices on the 3rd floor of the Harlow building on Riddle Street, Belden and Company. He specialized in shipping securities and foreign accounts. He liked complexity because it made simple greed look distinguished. At 7:10 this evening, his night clerk, Harry Munn, found him in the private office. He had been stabbed once in the throat. Pleasant. Yes. Was anything taken? I don't know. Who told you? Harry Munn telephoned me. He should not have, perhaps. But he was frightened. He knew Mr. Belden and I had worked closely. He said the office safe was open and papers were scattered. You had worked closely but left on bad terms. Yes. Why? She looked straight at me. Because Mr. Belden suggested that loyalty was a quality best proved in private. That removed 1 question and raised 3. You declined. Yes. With spirit. Yes. Good for you. Did anyone else know of his suggestion? I think not. I did not advertise it. Did you threaten him? Her chin went up. Numbered. Did he threaten you? Not directly. He implied that if I left him, I would find references hard to get. And did you? Number, I found another position. Where? At Haviland Imports, on Madison Avenue. All right, continue. She took a breath. The police believe they have nearly solved it already. That was fast work. Who has the wreath? Rowan Pike. That name was not dim. It had recently occupied a column or two in the papers, usually with mention of a crisp dinner jacket and an expression suggesting that he considered the rest of humanity a regrettable draft. He was wealthy, connected with finance, and had lately taken to producing opinions on public matters in the manner of a man distributing cigars that weren't his. Why Pike? Because he quarreled violently with Belden yesterday afternoon in front of 3 people, because Belden was handling funds for him, because something had gone wrong. I do not know the details, only that Pike accused him of betrayal and Belden replied that Pike would not dare make trouble because too much would come out. And tonight Rowan Pike was hosting a dinner at his house on East 64th Street. 11 guests besides himself. A formal dinner, very proper. They are prepared to swear he never left the table from 7 until after 9. I nodded. And the killing? Dr. Vollmer places it between 7:15 and 7:45. That is snug. Yes, too snug. It had begun to interest me. A little too smooth, has a smell, like perfume in a room that ought to smell of cigars. You think Pike did it anyway? I think if he did not, someone wishes very much that the police should stop at him, but I think he did. You dislike him. Yes, that won't do as evidence. I know that, then what will? She leaned forward. His alibi is perfect in the wrong way. It was built to be repeated. Every guest mentions the same things. The lobster course was served at 7:22, Mrs. Vale spilled wine at 7:28. Pike made a joke about the mayor at 7:31. Dr. Breaker coughed over the pheasant at 7:36. It is too exact. Dinner guests do not remember time that way unless they have been taught it. That was good, too. Very good. Maybe too good if she had rehearsed that speech in the taxi, but even rehearsed sense is still sense. You were not there, I said. Number. Then where did you get the menu with minute marks? My cousin was one of the guests, Eleanor Sloane. You have spoken with her. Yes, an hour ago. She said the house is full of police and dignity. Did she say Pike left the room? Number, she said he did not. She also said she could not shake the feeling that everyone was performing. And she told you this because she knows I distrust Rowan Pike. Why? Because he smiles with only one side of his mouth. I let it pass. Women are permitted private standards. The office door opened and Wolfe entered, moving with the measured economy of a large vessel entering harbor. He crossed to his desk and lowered himself into the chair that fit him as a throne, fits a king who distrusts democracy. His yellow eyes went first to Julia Raines, then to me. Well? Miss Raines brings murder with rainwater, I said. Edwin Belden, broker, found dead in his office on Riddle Street at about 7:10, throat punctured. Rowan Pike quarreled with him yesterday and now enjoys an alibi polished to a high social shine, supported by 11 dinner guests who seem to remember events by the minute. Wolfe grunted. I detest by the minute people, Miss Raines. Why have you come here? She rose. Because I believe the police will either arrest an innocent man or fail to understand how a guilty one arranged his innocence. Wolfe blinked. Which, I don't know. Then your confidence is broad, if not deep. Sit down. She sat. He folded his hands on the desk. You were Mr. Belden's secretary. Yes. You left because he made an indecent proposal. Yes. You therefore have reason to hate him. I did not hate him. I despised him. An energetic distinction. Did you kill him? Number. Wolfe nodded. Did you go to his office today? Number. Did anyone see you between 7 and 8 o'clock? She hesitated, and I felt the room tighten half an inch. No, she said, not continuously. Where were you? At home until 6:45, then in a taxi, then walking from Lexington Avenue to my apartment because traffic had stopped. I was alone. Wolfe closed his eyes. Not in fatigue and attention. He looks that way when he is arranging facts on invisible shelves. You are unwise, he said, to come to me before consulting counsel. I consulted my conscience first. A fool, a disorderly instrument, Archie. Get Mr. Kramer. I reached for the phone. Julia Raines turned sharply. You think I am lying? I think, Wolfe said, that if there is murder, the police must be told that a former employee of the deceased, one with grievance and no alibi, has come to me in agitation and with opinions. If you are innocent, candor can only help you. That is not what lawyers say. I am not a lawyer, Archie. I had Kramer's office in 60 seconds and Kramer himself in 2 minutes. Homicide had him, which was no surprise. When I told him there was a woman in Wolfe's office with material on the Belden killing, he used language that wouldn't have improved the duck, but he said he was coming. While we waited, Wolfe examined Miss Raines with the look of a botanist, considering an imported species that might or might not thrive. What was the nature of the quarrel between Mr. Pike and Mr. Belden? He asked. I don't know the exact matter, but Belden had handled certain transactions for Pike through a private account. Yesterday, Pike discovered a transfer he had not approved. How do you know? Harry Munn heard part of it. Belden told Pike that in finance, surprise was often another word for timing. Pike told him that theft was often another word for prison. Wolfe glanced at me. Pike has a vocabulary, irritating. Miss Raines continued. Harry said. Belden was angry but not frightened. That was unlike him. He was frightened of exposure the way some men are frightened of cold. Did he keep records? Yes, detailed ones. Too detailed. He liked to possess danger in filing cabinets. Where? In his office safe and in a locked dispatch box. Did you ever see papers relating to Pike? Yes, but months ago, foreign transfers, names of holding companies. I didn't understand all of it. You remember any names? She frowned. Meerford Holdings, and a shipping concern called Alton Maritime. Wolfe made no note. He seldom did. He stored names somewhere in the great padded labyrinth inside his head, and usually found them again when needed. I used paper, because mine was built on a lighter plan. The doorbell rang. I went and admitted Kramer. Inspector Kramer came in carrying weather and impatience, with his coat darkened by rain and his hat pushed back in a way that meant his temper had already got ahead of him. He gave me one glance, then moved into the office and saw Julia Rains. You, he said. So they had already met. Good. He removed his coat, flung it over the red leather chair, and faced Wolfe. What is this? A relay station. Wolfe waved a hand. Miss Rains brought herself. I sent for you. Sit down. Kramer sat only because his legs were tired enough to overrule pride. His broad red face was wet around the edges, and his eyes were bloodshot with a long day. You know Miss Rains? I asked. I know she was at the Harlow building before my men got half the corridor cleared. She asked too many questions and left before I could ask enough of mine. Julia spoke levelly. I told Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins my name and address. You did, Kramer said, and omitted that Belden had once employed you. I omitted nothing. He didn't ask. Kramer snorted. That's pretty, Wolfe. If you've got something, hand it over. If not, I have a corpse, a room full of financiers with ulcers, and a society dinner that makes me wish for the Black Hand. Wolfe inclined his head. Miss Rains believes Rowan Pike's alibi is suspiciously exact. Kramer glared at her. So do I, and that proves nothing. 10 people say he was there, and one of them is a judge with enough sense to notice if the host disappears. Pike may be a peacock, but he doesn't fly. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You have seen the body. Of course I've seen the body. And one thrust with a narrow blade, straight in upward angle. Quick, no signs of struggle. Belden was found on the floor beside his desk, safe door open. Papers around, windows shut. Hall boy says no one went in after 6:50 except the clerk who found him at 6:10. He stopped, frowned, and corrected himself. Found him at 7:10. Damn this weather. That interested me more than the correction. Kramer was too experienced to tangle times, unless there were too many of them already. Doctor's estimate? Wolfe asked. Between 7:15 and 7:45 approximately. That is after the body was found, Wolfe said. Kramer swore. Number, listen. The clerk left Belden alive at 6:10, came back at 7:10 and found him dead. The doctor says death probably occurred between 6:45 and 7. I've had 40 people and 3 clocks in my ears for an hour. Julia Rains closed her eyes for a second. I'm sorry. Kramer ignored her. Pike's dinner started at 6:30. Guests assembled by 6:40. 5, they say he was with them when cocktails were served. When they sat down, and through dinner, the Harlow building is downtown. Even with sirens and wings, he couldn't have gone there and back. I said, then why are you entertaining him? Because Belden had enough dirt on Pike to start a municipal garden, because Pike threatened him, and because perfect alibis give me indigestion. That makes 2 of you, I said, glancing at Wolfe. Wolfe grunted. Miss Rains, why did you go to the building? She answered Kramer rather than Wolfe. Because Harry Munn telephoned me and said Belden was dead. Why you? I told you, he knew I had worked for Belden. That's thin. It's all there is. Kramer turned to Wolfe. I was going to send for her anyway. Now I will. Miss Rains, don't leave your apartment tonight. If you do, I'll have you followed and annoyed. She rose. Inspector, am I a suspect? Yes, he said. Along with anyone else who had cause, access, or a pulse. She accepted that with a nod. Then I hope you will be fair. He barked a laugh. Lady Fairness in homicide is giving each liar an equal turn. She looked at Wolfe once, not pleading, only measuring him, then took her gloves and went. I went to the hall with her. At the front door she paused. You think he will take it, she said. I think he has already started, I told her. Even if I am a suspect. Especially then, murder improves his appetite. A corner of her mouth moved. Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Don't thank me. I haven't done anything yet except admire your gloves. She left, and the rain took her. When I returned to the office, Kramer was standing before Wolfe's desk with both fists planted on it. The posture of a man who had decided to bully a rhinoceros and found the angle awkward. You keep out of it, he said. Wolfe's lips moved. Number Kramer stared. No, number Archie, tomorrow morning. Obtain the newspapers early. Kramer threw up both hands. Confound it, Wolfe. This is police business. Most murder is, yet it persists in interesting me. You haven't been hired, that may occur. Or not. In either case, a man was killed. Another is too conveniently sheltered, and a woman with grievance and insufficient prudence has appealed to me. You know my weakness for structure. Kramer took a breath, held it, and let it go. He had been through this before, and knew the returns. All right, but if you so much as breathe on a witness without telling me, I'll sit on your stoop with a squad car and a sandwich board. I should enjoy the spectacle. I wouldn't. He reached for his coat. Belden's office is sealed. Pike is under watch, not arrest. I'll know by midnight whether any paper is missing from the safe. And if your Archie starts hopping about downtown, tell him to keep his hands in his pockets and his jokes to himself. No promise on the latter, I said. He glared once, then went out, slamming the front door hard enough to make the umbrella stand resent it. The office settled. Rain at the windows. A cab hissing past outside. The old house drawing itself in around us. Wolfe closed his eyes again, which meant I was to wait, not talk. I waited. After a minute he opened them. Archie. Yes, sir. Riddle Street. What do you know of it? 3 blocks of warehouses turned into offices for people who prefer secrecy to sunlight. Brokers, importers, shipping agents, and other men who say temporary arrangement when they mean theft. Good. Edwin Belden was one of those. So it seems. And Rowan Pike. A gentleman amateur of finance with dinner jackets and newspaper friends. Wolfe nodded. The woman is intelligent. Yes. Perhaps also manipulative. Yes. Do not agree so quickly. It is undignified. I'm flexible. He ignored it. The alibi troubles me. Because it's perfect. Number perfection is merely improbable. What troubles me is its display. If Pike were innocent, why would 10 guests remember a dinner as if taking dictation? And if guilty, why choose so vulgar a mechanism? There is ostentation in it. Maybe Pike's natural style, possible. Yet an ostentatious alibi may serve not to prove presence, but to conceal absence elsewhere, in thought, motive, or chronology. I said, that deserves coffee. Number it, deserves facts. Tomorrow, you will go to Riddle Street. Yes, sir. To the office, to the building, and to anyone willing to chatter. Learn the geography, the times, the clerk, the hall boy, the physician, the quarrel, the safe, and the dinner, also Pike's guest list. I can probably get that from the morning papers if his friends have already leaked it in self-defense. Get it anyway. He rose, which meant the conference was over and the evening had resumed its ordained order. Books for him, notes for me, and later a supper substantial enough to insult moderation. I sat at my desk a while after he had gone, looking at my notes and not seeing them. A lot had arrived in one damp package, a dead broker with a slit future, a financier whose alibi had been starched and ironed, a former secretary with poise under pressure, and a street named Riddle that was either showing off or promising fair. There are murders that begin with a scream, and there are murders that begin with a timetable. I had a hunch this one had begun with silver laid for 10 with candles, with servants moving like trained ghosts, and with somebody at the head of the table making sure everyone noticed exactly what time the wine was spilled. Outside, The fog pressed at the windows and the rain kept whispering over the city. Somewhere downtown, on Riddle Street, a dead man lay in a sealed office with his papers waiting to be counted. And somewhere uptown Rowan Pike was perhaps finishing his dinner, perhaps receiving condolences, perhaps wearing the look of a man unjustly inconvenienced. I sharpened a pencil. It was going to be that kind of case. Chapter 2. The table of 12 by 11 o'clock the next morning, I had learned 3 things. First, that Edwin Belden had been no more beloved in death than in life. Second, that Riddle Street in daylight looked less like a street than like an apology for one. And third, that when Nero Wolfe decided to inspect a dining room, society might count itself fortunate if only the dining room suffered. It was not often that Wolfe left the brownstone on business before he had been adequately argued with, and I had done my duty. I had pointed out that Pike would probably lie, that his guests would certainly lie, and that one dining room looked much like another, unless there was blood on the damask. Wolfe had listened with closed eyes, and then said that architecture of deception could sometimes be read in chairs, sideboards, and the order in which fish was served. Since that was the sort of remark that meant he had made up his mind before breakfast, I got the hat and coat. Rowan Pike lived in a limestone house on East 64th Street with a butler who looked as if he had been carved in modesty and polished with disapproval. He admitted us after hearing my name and Wolfe's, and the expression he gave us was one a bishop might reserve for a baccarat table. "Mr. Pike is expecting you," he said. That interested me. "He is." "Yes, sir," Inspector Kramer telephoned. That interested me less. Kramer was capable of warning a suspect that Wolfe was coming, partly out of irritation and partly because he enjoyed watching the collision. We were shown into the front room, where Pike came to us after exactly long enough to suggest that he had interrupted affairs of importance. Rowan Pike was in his early 40s, dark smooth, and made to order by a tailor with social ambition. He had a narrow face, controlled eyes and the one-sided smile. Julia Raines had objected to, she had been right. The left corner of his mouth did the work and the right preserved its independence. "Mr. Wolfe, Mr. Goodwin, a pleasure under shabby circumstances." "No," Wolfe said. Pike blinked. "I beg your pardon. It is not a pleasure. The circumstances are indeed shabby." I took a chair before anyone could improve that opening. Pike remained standing an instant, weighing whether affront or elegance would serve him better. Elegance won by a nose. "I understand," he said, "that Miss Raines may have discussed me with you." "She discussed your alibi," Wolfe told him. "Not you. Sit down." That did it. Pike sat. But he put enough starch in it to support a tent. "I am willing to assist," he said, "though I cannot imagine why private inquiry should be needed. I was here last evening from before 7 until after 10. 12 people can attest to it." 12, I said. I had heard 10. My cousin and my aunt arrived late enough to miss the cocktails, but not dinner. Wolfe grunted. "A large audience, Mr. Pike. I wish to see the dining room." Pike looked at him. "Now?" "Yes." For a second I thought he would refuse. Then curiosity got him. Men who think they are safe often permit liberties for the amusement of watching them fail. "Very well," he said. "This way." The dining room was at the rear, looking over a courtyard with wet stone and bare branches. The table had been cleared except for flowers in a low silver bowl. Even empty, it had a memory of occupation. Chairs precisely spaced, candles trimmed, the faint smell of Polish and old wine, and in the air the stale remnant of a meal that had been expensive enough to require witnesses. Wolfe entered and halted. He did not look around as ordinary people do, collecting impressions in handfuls. He fixed on one point, then another, moving only his eyes. I have seen him inspect a crime scene with less ceremony. "It seated 12, he asked. "Yes, 12 guests and no host." "12 including me," I said. "That makes a title problem." "The table of 12 sounds better than the table of 11 and Pike." No one thanked me. Wolfe moved to the head of the table. "You sat here?" "Yes." "And your guests?" Pike indicated places with a long, well-kept hand, Mrs. Vale on my right, Judge Forrester on my left, my cousin Eleanor Sloane opposite me, Dr. Breaker there, Mr. and Mrs. Lascelles, my aunt, Miss Pike, Arthur Denby, Philip Ordway, Caroline Neff, Henry Willis, and Gerald Vane. He had them ready. Too ready. He might as well have been reciting the apostles from an approved card. Wolfe turned to the butler, who had silently appeared in the doorway. "Your name, Bissett, sir." "Sir, you served dinner. I supervised it, sir." "Courses," Bissett answered at once. "Oysters, consomme, fay, salmon with sauce, pheasant, salad, cheese, pear tart." Wolfe looked at Pike. "A man was murdered, while you fed people a sequence." Pike's jaw moved barely. "I see no impropriety in maintaining a dinner, despite vulgar events elsewhere of which I knew nothing." "No," Wolfe murmured. "Archie, note the phrase." "I already disliked it," I said. Wolfe ignored me and asked Bissett, "Wine, Chablis with the fish, Burgundy with the pheasant, port with the cheese, sir." "Times." Bissett hesitated. Pike did not, which was enough in itself. "We sat at 7, Pike said. "The oysters were served at once, soup shortly after. The fish, about 7:20, pheasant at 7:35. "How exact?" Wolfe said. Pike gave the one-sided smile. "One remembers a dinner one has given. Do all your guests remember it to the minute?" "I have not interrogated them. Number that would be crude." Wolfe went around the table slowly. He stopped once behind a chair, then leaned over and touched the polished wood with one finger. He examined the distance between two places, glanced at the sideboard, then at the double doors to the pantry. "Were the dishes served from the left?" he asked Bissett. "Yes, sir." "You moved from the right?" "Yes, sir." "And the host remained seated?" "Ordinarily, sir." "Ordinarily," Pike said. "I rose once or twice, perhaps, to speak to someone or to see to the wine." "Of course," Wolfe said. "Sociability demands motion." He crossed to the sideboard. On it stood a silver coffee urn, 2 candelabra, and a bowl of hothouse roses, trying hard to smell natural. He studied the placement of the urn and then turned. "Mr. Pike, describe the conversation." Pike stared. "Conversation?" "Yes. At a dinner table, unless all present are cattle, there is talk." "What was it?" Pike shrugged lightly. "Politics, the mayor, the theatre, foreign markets." "In that order?" "I don't know." Wolfe's eyes were half closed. "Yet your guests remember the sequence of courses. The spilling of wine, a joke about the mayor, Dr. Breaker, coughing, and your uninterrupted presence. That is because the police questioned them." "Indeed, and they answered with commendable harmony." Pike's voice cooled. "Mr. Wolfe, if you intend to accuse me, do so plainly. I accuse you of hosting an excellent mnemonic arrangement." That landed, though he pretended it hadn't. Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, the menu." I had already spotted it, framed under glass on a small side table. That was enough to make me blink. Most people who cherish menus either got them from a wedding or a ship. This one, from last night's dinner, had been written in elegant script on cream card, and now lay preserved as if posterity might inquire. I handed it to Wolfe. He read it, then gave it to me. At the top, "Dinner for Mr. Rowan Pike. Tuesday, 8:30. Under it, "The courses in order, each with a small flourish. At the bottom, the wines." I looked up. 8:30, Pike said. "The printed hour. Guests often arrive earlier." "Then why print it?" He shrugged again. "Because that was the formal invitation time." Wolfe's eyes opened wider. "But they sat at 7. Pike said nothing. I said, "That's a generous interpretation of earlier." He took a breath. "A change was made during the afternoon. 2 guests requested an earlier hour. The cards had already been written. All 12 were informed." Wolfe asked. "Yes. How?" "By telephone." "Who telephoned them?" "My secretary. Name, Miss Bell." "Where is she?" "At my office." Wolfe handed the menu back to me, as I thought. Pike lifted his chin. What did you think? That menus may be composed not merely to direct appetite, but to regulate memory. Pike gave a short laugh with no pleasure in it. That is nonsense. Number it is theatre. Each course a bell, each incident attached to a plate. The fish arrives, summoner remarks on markets. The pheasant arrives, summoner spills wine. A joke is made, a cough occurs, and the host is observed because observation has been invited. If the police ask later what happened, they are given not recollection, but cues. Pike's face tightened. You are inventing. Possibly, yet I find invention more credible than 12 adults independently recalling soup as if it had been cross-examined. I said, especially if the soup was only soup. Servants get deaf by trade, but this one was hearing every syllable. Wolfe wheeled on him. You, Bissett, did Mr. Pike speak to you before dinner about the order of service? Yes, sir, naturally. Did he emphasize punctuality? A pause. He prefers smoothness, sir. Did he instruct that no course be delayed? Yes, sir. Did he mention that the hour of each course might later be important? Pike cut in. This is intolerable. Answer. Wolfe snapped and Bissett, startled, did, Mr. Pike said. The butler murmured. Let there be no confusion about the order. People remember food better than speech. There was a silence then that could have sliced oranges. Pike turned his head slowly toward the butler. If a look could reduce a man to domestic silver, Bissett would have been in a drawer. Wolfe made a small sound in his throat. Satisfaction, not triumph. He had found not proof, but a seam. Thank you, he said. Archie, we are done here. Pike rose. You are not done. You are making insinuations out of household management. Wolfe faced him. Yes, because household management is the soul of this alibi. I do not yet know whether you killed Edwin Belden. I begin to doubt that you could have done so with your own hand. But I am now certain of one thing. This dinner was arranged, timed, and furnished with memory. Hooks before the police ever asked a question. That is not innocence. It is preparation. Pike's one-sided smile returned, but this time it had an edge. Mr. Wolfe, if I expected to be accused, I had reason. Belden threatened me publicly. I knew that if anything happened to him, fools would look to me first. Then perhaps, Wolfe said, you are merely a prudent man. I dislike prudent men. They require too much sorting. We left him standing by the head of his table, with the flowers, the silver, and the ghost of 12 obedient recollections hanging around him like stage curtains after the audience had gone. On the sidewalk, with the March wind coming damp around the corner, I said, well, Wolfe adjusted his scarf as if weather were a personal insult. The menu is a script. Yes, but for whom? That is the point. For the guests, perhaps, or for the police, or for one guest in particular. When memory is led by the hand, Archie, it is usually being taken somewhere. Belden's office? But we do not be linear. We have learned that Pike expected scrutiny before Belden's death was known. That is significant. I look back at the house. You think he knew it was coming? I think, Wolfe said, that either Pike anticipated murder or he anticipated accusation. Both are interesting. We must now learn which guest needed instruction, which servant feared error, and why the invitation card still says 8:30 when the true hour was 7. Carelessness does not print in script and frame itself under glass. That was Wolfe, a whole staircase built from one cream-colored card. As we headed for the corner to find a cab, I took out my notebook and looked again at the guest list I had copied from Pike's own lips. 12 at table, everyone placed like a chessman, a host with a polished alibi, a butler who had repeated one sentence too many, and somewhere under the courses, oysters, soup, salmon, pheasant, lay the real business of the evening, hidden the way poison is hidden, not by being invisible, but by being served with style. By the time we reached the avenue, I was hungry. Wolfe, naturally, was not. He had fed on something else. Chapter 3. The Dead Man's Ledger. If there is one thing in New York, less cheerful than a downtown office building on a rainy morning. It is that same building on the morning after a murder. The Harlow building on Riddle Street had always looked as if it had been put up by a contractor with a grievance. But when I got there with Wolfe, a little after noon, it had acquired the additional charm of policemen, whispered speculation, and a janitor who looked offended that death had been brought in without a permit. Kramer met us in the corridor outside Belden's office. He was chewing the end of an unlit cigar and glaring at the transom as if it had lied to him. "You," he said to Wolfe, "I ought to charge admission." "You could not collect enough to improve your department," Wolfe told him. Kramer grunted. "Go ahead. But don't touch anything unless you ask. And don't ask unless you have to. That is a vulgar standard. It's the one you get." The office was larger than I had expected and meaner in spirit. Belden had liked comfort, but only the kind that could be locked. The outer room held 3 desks, filing cabinets, a switchboard, and an expensive rug that had seen too many wet shoes. The inner office, where Belden had died, held the usual furniture of a prosperous scoundrel: a big mahogany desk, leather chairs, a wall safe, framed shipping prints, a globe large enough to suggest international interests, and curtains heavy enough to keep out both light and conscience. Belden himself was gone, having been moved to pleasanter company, but the room still had his outline in it. The desk lamp stood tilted. One drawer was open. The safe door yawned. On the carpet near the desk there was a dark stain the size of a dinner plate, now dulled by sawdust and official attention. Wolfe stood in the doorway and took it in without entering. That is one of his tricks. Most people hurry to the center of a room as if truth were a flower bed. Wolfe starts at the edges. "Who found him?" he asked. Kramer jerked a thumb. "Munn, the clerk. He's outside." "Latter." "First, the desk." Kramer gave him a look, and then nodded to me, which meant I could use gloves and do the nimble work while Wolfe distributed instructions, like a prince regretting democracy. I went to the desk. There were account books, correspondence trays, a calendar, an ivory, handled letter opener, 2 fountain pens, and the sort of ordered confusion men cultivate when they want to appear indispensable. "What is missing from the safe?" Wolfe asked. Kramer blew air through his nose. "That's the pleasant part. We don't know exactly. Securities are accounted for. Cash is accounted for. 2 private files may be incomplete, but there's enough paper in that box to heat Brooklyn." "Which files?" One marked MH and one marked up. That stirred me. "M?" Kramer nodded. "Not Miss Raines. Different initials. Maybe a client, maybe a ghost." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "And the RP is Pike." "Looks like it." I was sorting papers as they spoke, lifting, glancing, replacing. Belden had kept copies of everything, which fitted what Julia Raines had said. Men who enjoy danger often insist on receipts. In the second right-hand drawer, I found a leather ledger, thick, expensive, and too worn to be decorative. "Here," I said. Kramer came over. Wolfe did not. "Open it," he said. I did. It was a private ledger, not office bookkeeping. Columns of dates, transfers, initials, account designations, and small coded marks in the margins. The entries ran neat and close, with the kind of penmanship produced by a man who believes clarity is a form of possession. Halfway through, several leaves had been cut out with something sharp. Kramer swore. "1 page?" Wolfe asked. "3, I said, "maybe 4. Recently removed." I examined the stubs. "Not yesterday. The edges have settled, but not long ago either." Kramer took the book from me and flipped pages with less tenderness than the binding deserved. "There's Pike again, Rapp and here, Miraford Holdings, Alton Maritime. Same names as on some of the office correspondence." Wolfe moved at last, lumbering toward the desk and lowering his bulk into the chair Belden had occupied, until somebody shortened his prospects. He held out a hand. Kramer hesitated, then surrendered the ledger. Wolfe read, not rapidly, but with total concentration. He went back twice. Then he looked up. "This is not accountancy," he said. "It is insurance." "That's what I thought," I said. He ignored me. Entries of transfers, dates, intermediaries, confirmations, and these symbols in the margin, Mr. Kramer. Belden was not merely keeping records for business. He was preserving leverage. Kramer nodded once. We know that much. We found a dispatch box in the cabinet with copies of letters to Pike and others. Most are harmless enough if you are a banker and a scoundrel, but a few would raise eyebrows. Only eyebrows? I asked. On Wall Street, yes. I turned back to the desk. Under a stack of invoices in the left pigeonhole, there was an envelope browned at one corner, not burned through, just scorched, as if it had touched a match or a cigar too closely. It was empty. Look at this. Kramer took it, sniffed it, looked annoyed because the sniff told him nothing, and handed it to Wolfe. Wolfe held it by the edge, addressed by hand, no stamp, delivered by messenger or by the owner. The front showed only, for opening after midnight if necessary. That improved the room at once, Kramer said. We found that this morning in the wastebasket. Pearlie thought it was trash. Pearlie was right, I said. Only interesting trash. Inside, Wolfe asked. Nothing, Kramer said. Empty. Not empty, Wolfe murmured. Emptied. He put the envelope down and pointed with one finger. Archie. The basket. I went to it. Wastebaskets after homicide are like confessionals after a festival. Everybody has dropped something they shouldn't. Crumpled carbons, a cigar band, a torn memorandum, pencil shavings, and ash, I sorted. Near the bottom, caught between two wads of paper, was a half-slip of thin receipt stock. Hello. It was torn across the middle, but enough remained. Received from EB1 packet to be held until 9 am Wednesday. Then the rest gone, including the signature. He handed it over. Kramer's face changed. Why wasn't that in the property list? Because your boys are overworked and under-romantic, I said. He gave me a look and read the slip again. Held where? By whom? Wolfe's lips had tightened. That is the question Belden expected the morning to answer. He reached for the scorched envelope and read the writing again. For opening after midnight, if necessary. Then he tapped the torn receipt. A packet placed somewhere last evening, to be held until 9 this morning. This envelope perhaps intended to explain it, or to direct its use if something occurred to Belden during the night. You think he knew he was in danger? Kramer asked. Yes. Then why sit here waiting for a knife? Wolfe turned his head. Because fear does not always improve judgment, particularly in men who have long sold protection to themselves. I said, Belden had a dead man's switch, crude phrase, but near enough. Kramer took the receipt and slid it into an evidence folder with a care that meant it had moved up in rank. All right. Suppose he expected trouble from Pike. Probably, Wolfe said. The ledger points that way. Kramer folded his arms. Then Pike had motive. Yes, but motive is not action. Do not pant. I had gone back to the open drawer beneath a blotter. Hidden flat against the wood was a small key taped in place. I peeled it off and held it up. Kramer came fast. Where the devil? Under the blotter. Belden liked layers. What key? Too small for the safe, cabinet, box locker, or a sentimental diary. Wolfe's eyes rested on it. Search the room for a matching lock. We did, no match in the office. Outer or inner, no desk compartment untried, no cabinet awaiting it. Kramer called in a plainclothes man and had him search again with official resentment. Nothing. Then it goes elsewhere, Wolfe said. Mr. Kramer, did Belden leave the office yesterday? Not after 4:30 that we know. Any messenger sent out? One boy delivered letters at 5:10. Find out where. I'm finding out everything, Kramer snapped. Some of it even helps. There was a knock on the jamb and Harry Munn came in. He was youngish, thin, and had the look of a man born apologizing for occupying floor space. His collar was too large, and his hands were performing lonely exercises. You wanted me, Inspector? Kramer nodded. Tell it again. From 6 o'clock. Munn swallowed. Mr. Belden was in the inner office. Mr. Rowan Pike had been there earlier in the afternoon, but was gone before 5. At 6:10, I took in the last correspondence. Mr. Belden was alive then. He told me to go downstairs and get the registered mail from the desk if it came. I was away some time. There was confusion because of the rain and a delivery. I came back up at 7:10 and found him. Did he seem nervous at 6:10? Wolfe asked. Munn looked startled at being addressed by a civilian mountain. Yes, sir. More than usual. He kept looking at the clock. Did he say why? No, sir. Only once he asked whether a messenger had come. He only said, "If anyone comes for the packet, send him in at once." Kramer and I looked at Wolfe. Wolfe did not move. Did anyone come? He asked. No, sir. Did Belden receive any letter by hand? Munn licked his lips. Yes, sir. Around 6, an envelope. A man brought it. What man? I didn't know him. Medium height, dark coat, hat down. He left right away. The envelope. I took it in to Mr. Belden. He read it and told me I could go. The same envelope? I asked, indicating the scorched one on the desk. Munn stared. I think so, yes. Did you see what was in it? No, sir. Did Belden burn it? I don't know, sir. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, then opened them on Munn. The packet. Did you see it? Munn hesitated. Kramer barked. Answer. Yes, sir. A wrapped bundle of papers tied with cord. Mr. Belden had it on the desk when I took in the correspondence. He put it in his dispatch case, then took it out again. Size? Wolfe asked. Like a thin book. There, Wolfe said softly to Kramer after Munn had been dismissed. He expected a collector, or a courier, before the night ended, and if the collector did not come, the packet was to be held until morning. Kramer frowned. Which means the murder wasn't temper. It was interception. Yes, I said. Somebody needed to stop the packet from surviving until 9. Wolfe nodded. Exactly. The knife may have been personal. The timing was not. Belden was silenced because morning was dangerous. Kramer stood very still. A new shape had come into the case, and he saw it. Pike, with his careful dinner and his rehearsed recollections, had looked yesterday like a man constructing innocence. Now he looked also like a man buying time. Desperate, Kramer muttered. Wolfe corrected him. Perhaps, but desperation is not always active. Remember that. I was looking again at the ledger in Wolfe's hand. Beside 3 entries marked RP, there was the same margin symbol, a small cross with one arm longer than the others. Further down, beside a notation for a foreign transfer, there was an added word in Belden's own neat script. Wednesday. That did it for me. Belden had expected something to mature, burst, or be delivered by Wednesday morning. He had arranged for a packet to survive him. He had received a hand-delivered note after 6. And before 9 o'clock could arrive, he had been killed on his own carpet. Outside the windows the day had darkened early, and Riddle Street looked like the sort of place where men came to hide transactions from daylight, and found too late that daylight had habits of its own. Wolfe rose from Belden's chair with the air of a man leaving bad company. Archie, he said, we need the messenger, the packet, the holder of that receipt, and the identity of MH first, I asked. All 4 at once. One of them will open the others. And Pike. Wolfe turned his head toward the safe, the desk, and the wastebasket. The whole little kingdom Belden had ruled, until a knife amended the charter. Pike, he said, is no longer merely a host, with a polished memory. He is a man standing under a clock. Before this is over, we shall learn whether he wound it, or whether he heard it strike and panicked. That was Wolfe at his best. Not chasing the blood, but the purpose behind it. And purpose, sitting in Belden's office, had begun to smell stronger than murder. Chapter 4. The Kitchen with 2 Clocks. When Nero Wolfe decides that the truth may be hiding among saucepans, there is no dignity left anywhere. He does not like kitchens that are not Fritz's, and he likes servants who belong to other households even less, because they either become marble statues or else discover a sudden passion for falsehood. But by 3 o'clock that afternoon, He had reached a point in the Pike matter where even his distaste had to travel in harness. "We will go back," he said, "to the dining room. Number the kitchen." I put down the slip of notes I had been making from Belden's ledger. "Wonderful. Shall I notify the cook that Genius is on the way?" "Do not be vulgar." I wasn't being vulgar, I was being charitable to the cook. He gave me a look that would have frozen soup. We got hats and coats, and went out again into a city that was still damp enough to resent shoes. Pike received us with the same controlled annoyance, but this time it had less polish on it. Word had got around. Kramer had been back since noon, and a man under police attention begins to understand that all his tailoring won't keep out inquiry. He stood in the front room with one hand on the mantel and the other, holding a cigarette he wasn't smoking. "Again?" he said. "Yes," Wolfe told him. "Your kitchen." Pike stared. "My, what? Kitchen? Since your guests remember dinner as though it had been engraved, I should like to know whether the household remembers it too." "That is absurd." "Very likely. So is murder," I said. "Absurdity is one of our specialties. It saves time if you cooperate." His mouth did the one-sided trick and failed to become a smile. "This is harassment." "No," Wolfe said. "That would require enthusiasm." He won. Men like Pike are accustomed to command where carpets are thick. But a direct assault from Wolfe tends to leave them holding air. Pike rang for Bissett and ordered that we be admitted to the kitchen offices and that the servants answer questions. He said it as if he were granting a diplomatic concession. The kitchen lay below and behind the dining room. And if the dining room had remembered silver and roses, the kitchen remembered labor. It was large, bright, hot, and immaculate in the severe way serious kitchens are. Copper pans hung in order. Knives stood in a rack with military self-respect. On a central table were bowls, chopping boards, and a row of white crocks, labeled in a precise hand. There was enough heat for baking gilt out of a bishop. A woman in white stood by the range, broad in the shoulder, red in the face, and carrying a spoon as if it were a legal instrument. This was Mrs. Dover, the cook. Beside the scullery door hovered a thin parlor maid named Elsie Trent, and behind them, with resigned elegance, Bissett. Mrs. Dover looked at Wolfe the way a cat looks at a cello. "If this is about the menu, I have already told the police." "Then repetition will not injure you," Wolfe said. "I am Nero Wolfe." She sniffed. "I am Mrs. Dover." That was good enough for an introduction. Wolfe planted himself where he could see the range, the service hatch, the clock on the wall, and the small side table where plated dishes had evidently waited before going upstairs. He turned his head slowly. "You served dinner for 12 last evening," he said. 11 guests and Mr. Pike." "Yes." "At what time did service begin?" "Just after 7. "Exactly." "Number, I do not boil eggs by astronomy." I liked her a little. "What were the courses?" "Oysters first, then consomme fait salmon. Pheasant, salad, cheese tart, the same as printed on the menu card." "Yes." "At what intervals?" She frowned. "Natural intervals. We are not a railway station." Wolfe's eyes shifted to Bissett. But Mr. Pike instructed that no course be delayed. Bissett said stiffly, "Mr. Pike prefers smooth service." Mrs. Dover swung on him. "Smooth is one thing, fool-fussing is another." Ah, Wolfe noticed it too. There was fussing. She tightened, only that Mr. Pike came down twice to ask whether the fish was ready. Gentlemen should stay where they belong. "Twice," I said. "Yes." Pike, who had followed us down and now stood near the door with an expression of expensive distaste, said, "That is exaggerated." Mrs. Dover gave him one glance and kept her spoon. "No, sir, it is not." Once before the soup had gone up, and once while the salmon was being plated. "Time?" Wolfe asked. She wiped her hands on her apron, thinking. "The first would be about 7:10, the second 7:25, perhaps." Pike said sharply, "That is nonsense. I was at table." Wolfe turned his head. "Not continuously, it seems." Mrs. Dover looked from one to the other and realized too late that she had trodden on social upholstery. "He was not away long," she said. A gentleman can come down a staircase and go up again in less than a minute. Indeed, Wolfe said, especially if he practices. Pike's cigarette broke between his fingers. Wolfe ignored him and pointed to the clock on the wall. That clock, was it correct, last evening? Mrs. Dover glanced up. Mostly, it gains or loses. I don't know which, Bissett tends it, Bissett said. It was within a minute. Of what? Wolfe asked. The hall clock, not the dining room clock. There is no dining room clock, sir. Then by what instrument was the punctuality of the courses regulated? Bissett hesitated, and in that second I saw Wolfe's shoulders alter a little. He had scented something. By the hall clock, Bissett said. And here, Mrs. Dover snorted. By what was hot, and what was spoiling, like every sane kitchen. Wolfe nodded. Show me yesterday's oven logs. She blinked. My what? You keep notes, do you not? Temperature, timing, orders. I keep my own head, a regrettable filing system. She opened her mouth. I cut in before she could attempt murder number 2. What Mr. Wolfe means is, did you make any written preparations? A worksheet, list of courses and times? Her chin lifted. Certainly, there. She pointed to a slate board on the wall. It had been wiped, but not perfectly. Chalk ghosts remained. Stock 5:30, fish 7, Fies 7:40. And beneath that a line that had only partly vanished. Hold 10 minutes. Wolfe got up and crossed to it. His big finger hovered an inch from the marks. Interesting. Mrs. Dover said, It means nothing. I wipe it every day. Yes, and yesterday it meant something. Fish 7. What? 7:20. 7:30. 7:25. Yet the dining room account places fish at 7:20. That is near enough. Not if memory is being printed. She stared, I said. Mrs. Dover, did anything delay the fish? She shifted, and her spoon moved from one hand to the other. Only Mr. Pike. He wanted the sauce remade. Why? He said it had skinned. Had it? Number. Then why remake it? She compressed her lips. Ask him. We all looked at Pike. He had gone very still. It is customary, he said, for a host to care about quality, especially when quality affects time, Wolfe murmured. He turned suddenly to the side table by the hatch. On it sat 2 silver warming trays, unplugged now but clean. He bent, inspected the cords, then asked, Were these used last night? Yes, Bissett said. For which course? The soup and the pheasant. Not the fish. No, sir. Why not? Mrs. Dover answered. Fish waits poorly. Wolfe grunted and moved to the range. He put a hand to the metal, then to the smaller oven, then glanced at the row of plates warming above. His attention fixed on a second clock, smaller than the wall one, propped on a shelf near the service hatch. That clock, he said. Who's Elsie Trent, the maid, startled as if she had been pinched? Mine, sir. You bring your own clock to work? Her cheeks colored. No, sir. It was set there because the bell in the pantry failed. Set when? Yesterday afternoon. By whom? She looked at Bissett, then at Pike, then at the floor. Mr. Bissett, sir. For what purpose? So I'd know when to take the plates. Was it correct? I don't know, sir. Mr. Bissett said to use that one and not the wall clock. There it was. Wolfe's head turned very slowly to Bissett. Why? The butler's face did not change, but his collar looked tighter. The kitchen clock is unreliable. And this one? I had set it. By what? The hall clock. Then why not use the kitchen clock if both corresponded? Bissett said nothing. Mrs. Dover broke in, suddenly eager. Because they didn't correspond. That little one was 5 minutes fast all evening, and I told him so. I told him if he sent the soup early again, I'd have his hide. Bissett's eyes flashed at her. You are mistaken. I am not. I know when stock is ready and when a joint has rested. Wolfe looked at me, Archie. Yes, sir. 1 clock for the house. Another for the service, 5 minutes. Yes, Pike said, too quickly. This is trivial. No, Wolfe said. This is mechanics. He turned to Elsie Trent. You were here during service? Yes, sir. At all times? No, sir. I took dishes in and out. Then Mr. Bissett sent me to the florist's icebox in the Mews for extra greens. Mrs. Dover swung toward her. At that hour, Elsie swallowed. Yes, ma'am. What hour? Wolfe asked. The girl pressed her hands together. Just before the fish, sir, or after? I don't know. You must know. Her eyes filled. I don't, sir. I was told to go at once. By whom? Mr. Bissett. For greens. Yes, sir. Where greens needed, Mrs. Dover barked. Number we had enough salad to feed a regiment. Bissett's voice sharpened. There had been concern over quality. Quality my elbow, Mrs. Dover snapped. You wanted her out, Pike said. This is becoming grotesque. It became grotesque when a man was killed, Wolfe told him. We are merely approaching the place. He faced Elsie again, gentler than usual, which for Wolfe is like warm weather in January. How long were you gone? 10 minutes, sir, perhaps 15. The yard was slippery. And when you returned? She looked frightened of the answer before she gave it. Mr. Pike was in the passage by the pantry. Mr. Bissett was carrying the fish tray up. Mr. Pike told me to stay below until called. Pike spoke at once. I may have gone down to inquire, nothing more. Of course, Wolfe said. A sociable host, Mrs. Dover, when the fish was served. Was it hot? She frowned at the insult. Number warm enough, but not right. And the pheasant? Too early from the oven, then held. Wolfe's eyes were hooded. Held 10 minutes. She looked at the slate. Yes. I had it then, or enough of it to feel the shape. The dining room had remembered neat intervals because the intervals had been forced. But down here the forcing showed. A fish delayed, then hurried. A pheasant cooked to a schedule, not a table. 1 clock in the kitchen, and another in the house. A maid sent away exactly when an extra pair of eyes might have noticed who was using the passage and the stairs. 2 clocks indeed. Wolfe moved to the shelf, picked up the small clock, and examined its back. There was a winding key taped to it and a penciled mark, +5. He handed it to me. Note that. Pike came forward a step. You have no right to pry among my servants and household arrangements as though this were a music hall. Wolfe faced him. On the contrary, Mr. Pike. It is your household that has made it a music hall. Your dinner upstairs was timed for memory. Your kitchen below was timed for control. They are not the same thing. Pike's face had drained a little. You're constructing fantasies from trivial discrepancies. Wolfe's voice stayed mild, which is when it is often most offensive. A discrepancy is never trivial when it concerns time in a murder inquiry. Upstairs your guests remember fish at 7:20 and your uninterrupted presence. Downstairs your cook recalls your appearance near 7:25. Your butler uses a separate clock set 5 minutes fast, and a maid is sent away at the critical moment. The heat of the service does not match the temperature of the story. Mrs. Dover stared at him as if she had just found out that language could be sharpened. I said, Mr. Pike, were you perhaps trying to make the courses arrive before the actual time they would later represent? He ignored me, which is one of the disadvantages of being Archie Goodwin in a room with Nero Wolfe. Suspects often save their best hate for the larger target. Wolfe set his hat squarely on his head. That meant he had what he wanted, or enough to be dangerous with it. As we turned to go, Elsie Trent spoke in a voice so small it might have been steam. Sir. Wolfe stopped. The bell from the dining room rang twice during the fish, she said. Not once, Mr. Bissett told me never mind it. He said Mr. Pike would serve. No one said anything for a second. Then Wolfe nodded. Thank you. That was all. But it was enough to make Bissett look suddenly like a man who had been left holding a tray in a thunderstorm. We went out through the service passage and up the back stairs to the hall. Pike did not escort us. He had remained in the kitchen, no doubt deciding whether outrage or bribery had the better chance with his own staff. At the front door, I said. Well, Wolfe settled into his coat with difficulty and displeasure. Time ran differently in that house last night. Yes, the dinner was not merely remembered, it was engineered. Yes, for what purpose? To let Pike slip out. Number, do not be greedy, we are not ready for that. But we now know the house had two systems of time, the public one for witnesses and the service one for execution. That is not accidental. You think Bissett helped? I think Bissett obeyed someone. Whether from loyalty, fear, or payment, remains to be learned. And the maid. She was removed because kitchens have eyes. We stepped onto the wet pavement. A cab splashed by, throwing a fan of dirty water into the gutter. Across the street, a delivery boy stood under an awning eating an apple and watching the house with the respectful appetite New Yorkers reserve for trouble that belongs to the rich. He looked back at Pike's windows. Somewhere in there were 12 remembered courses, a framed menu, a butler with 2 clocks, a cook with a temper and better instincts than manners, and a host who had apparently needed the fish to mean one time upstairs and another below. One belongs to the house, I said, and the other belongs to the lie, Wolfe grunted. At last, Archie, a sentence with structure. Praise from him is rare enough to preserve. We headed for a cab, and I was thinking that if time had been altered in Pike's house, then somebody had not merely needed an alibi. Somebody had needed a window, small, exact, and usable. Upstairs, the guests had been given a performance. Downstairs, the servants had been made to keep the machinery running. And somewhere between those 2 clocks, Edwin Belden had died. Chapter 5. Witnesses with full bellies by 6 o'clock that evening. The front room and office on West 35th Street had acquired the air of a private club whose membership had been selected by homicide. Wolfe had decided, after his excursion into Pike's kitchen, that the dinner guests should be viewed in a herd rather than singly. That was like him. He preferred lies under pressure, and there is no pressure quite like seeing your recollection reflected in the faces of 11 other people who may be remembering something else. Kramer objected, naturally. He objected at length, with color, and with some inventive references to interference, vanity, and private detectives who should be fed to municipal boilers. Wolfe let him object. Then he said that if Kramer wanted the truth before Easter, he had better send the guests around. Kramer swore again and did it. At 6:15 they began to arrive. Judge Forrester came first, grey, whiskered and stiff, carrying his dignity as if the city had stopped issuing replacements. Mrs. Vale arrived in perfume and indignation. Dr. Breaker came with a professional air of being available for illness, but not nonsense. Eleanor Sloane, Julia Raines's cousin, was composed and watchful. Arthur Denby was pink and prosperous. Philip Ordway looked as if he had lately discovered pessimism and approved it. Caroline Neff had the bright eyes of a woman who hears everything and reports only part. Henry Willis was one of those men who seem made of folded umbrellas. Gerald Vane was handsome enough to distrust. Mr. and Mrs. Lascelles arrived together and separated immediately, which told me plenty, and at last Miss Pike, the aunt, entered with the look of a woman who regarded family as a chronic disorder. Rowan Pike came last, which was a mistake. When the man under scrutiny arrives last to his own inquest, he admits too much without speaking. Wolfe had them arranged in the office and front room with the doors open between, so he could sit at his desk, see them all, and force them to see one another. I had taken a chair at one side with notebook in hand. Kramer was in the red leather chair, looking like a committee of complaint. When the rustle and mutter had subsided, Wolfe put down the paper knife he had been holding and said, "Good evening. You have all been inconvenienced. That is regrettable. A man has been murdered. That is more so." No one laughed. "Good. You were guests at Mr. Rowan Pike's house last evening," Wolfe continued. "Each of you has given the police an account of that dinner. The accounts agree notably in certain particulars and diverge curiously in others. I should like to see what remains when they are compared in company." Judge Forrester cleared his throat. "Mr. Wolfe, I agreed to assist Inspector Kramer, not to be subjected to theatrics." Wolfe inclined his head. Then assist him by remaining. Kramer grunted. The judge remained. Wolfe turned to Pike. Mr. Pike, you may sit. You are too narrow to loom. Pike sat on the chair nearest the globe, crossed one leg over the other, and performed his one-sided smile for the room. Proceed. Oh, I shall. He looked first at Mrs. Vale. Madam, the dinner began when? At 7, she said promptly. Exactly, approximately. One doesn't watch the clock at dinner. Excellent, you recall that now. But yesterday you told Inspector Kramer that the oysters were served at 7:03. She blinked. Did I? Then I was estimating. Precisely, and the fish. Soon after, around 7:20. Did you know that, or were you told it? I was not told anything. By anyone. A little color touched her cheeks. Number Wolfe nodded and turned to Dr. Breaker. You coughed over the pheasant. The doctor looked annoyed. So I am informed. You do not remember it. I remember clearing my throat. Mrs. Vale has improved it. Mrs. Vale drew herself up. You nearly choked. No, madam, I did not. Good, Wolfe said. A distinction. At what time did this occur? Breaker frowned. I haven't the least idea. Wolfe looked at Pike. Yet your guests have supplied times for it, Pike said coolly. You are speaking as though recollection were conspiracy. Number, I am speaking as though precision were imported. He shifted to Eleanor Sloane. Miss Sloane, you sat opposite Mr. Pike. Yes. Did you watch him continuously? Number. Then how do you know he remained at table? Because he was there whenever I looked up. A valuable formula, Wolfe said. Whenever you looked up, how often? I don't know. Frequently. Yes, constantly. Number, did he rise at any point? A pause. Then, I think once, or half rose, to speak to Bissett. Pike turned his head. You are mistaken. No, she said, still calm. I may be mistaken about whether he stood fully, but he moved. That gave the room a small electric stir. Not much, but enough. Wolfe pounced on it like a cat who disapproves of wasted motion. Mr. Denby, did Mr. Pike leave his chair? Denby blinked pinkly. I really couldn't say. I was speaking to Mrs. Lascelles. During which course? I haven't the faintest idea. Excellent, Wolfe said, a man of truth. Mrs. Lascelles gave Denby a sharp look that said truth was all very well in moderation. Wolfe turned to her. Madam, do you recall Mr. Pike carving? Of course, the pheasant. With his own hand. Yes. Was it a whole bird or already jointed? She stared. A whole bird, I think. Mr. Lascelles said suddenly. Number 2 birds. Already trussed, then finished on the board. His wife turned to him. Nonsense. He shrugged. Then I am nonsensical. Wolfe's eyes narrowed in pleasure. And where, Mr. Lascelles, was the carving done? At the sideboard. Mrs. Vale said, at table. No, Ordway put in unexpectedly. The sideboard. Pike stood. 3 voices, 3 versions. I wrote fast. Wolfe let the little confusion breathe, then lifted a hand and it subsided. Miss Pike, your nephew's presence. Did you observe it throughout? Certainly not, she said tartly. I was trying to eat dinner, not nurse a child. That earned a quick glance from Pike, which she ignored with veteran efficiency. But you believe he remained, Wolfe said. I believe he was host enough not to wander. Belief, Wolfe murmured, useful but treacherous. He swung toward Gerald Vane. Mr. Vane, at any point did you address Mr. Pike and fail to receive an immediate reply? Vane smoothed his tie. I don't recall. Try. Well, I asked him something about Belden, as a matter of fact. That changed the air again, Pike said sharply. I don't remember that. Vane's handsome face acquired defensive lines. You may not, I do. It was during the fish. What did you ask? Whether the rumors about Belden were true. And you told me not to mention the man at dinner. Pike said. "If that occurred, it only proves I was present." "Yes," Wolfe said, for one instant. That stopped him. Wolfe turned to Henry Willis, who looked as if he would rather be fined. "Mr. Willis, did you at any time see the host's place empty?" "I didn't look." "Yet you told the police Mr. Pike never left." Willis reddened. "I assumed." "Exactly. You assumed." Wolfe sat back. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are not witnesses in the strict sense. You are diners. There is a difference. You remember being hosted. You do not remember observing." Judge Forrester bristled. "Sir, I resent that. I am a man trained to observe." "Then tell me," Wolfe said at once, "whether the candles on the table were lit when the fish was served." The judge opened his mouth and then closed it. Mrs. Neff said, "Of course they were." Ordway said, "No, not yet." Breaker muttered, "I never notice candles." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep my face still. Wolfe's voice was almost gentle. "You see, certainty is often only hospitality digested." Pike said coldly, "This proves nothing except the fallibility of memory." "No," Wolfe said, "it proves more. It proves that the confidence of your guests exceeds the content of their observations." He leaned forward. "Each of you has given the police the same central fact. Mr. Pike was there. But when pressed, not one of you can testify to uninterrupted watchfulness. You recall his voice. Yes, you recall his role as host. Yes, you recall the order of courses because the order imposed itself. But no one watched him every minute. No one." Kramer spoke for the first time in several minutes. "That's what I've been trying to get through their skulls." Judge Forrester glared at him. "Inspector." "No," Wolfe said, overriding both. "Let us be exact. Mr. Pike may have been absent briefly without any of you being aware of it. Or he may not. I am not yet asserting that he did. I am asserting only that your statements have exceeded your knowledge." There was silence. It was not a pleased silence. Then Eleanor Sloane said, "Mr. Wolfe, that is fair." Pike gave her a look. "Is it?" "Yes," she said. "We all felt him there because he made us feel hosted. That is not the same as seeing him every moment." Mrs. Vale said defensively, "Well, naturally one doesn't stare at a host." "Quite," Wolfe said. "That is why a host makes such an excellent subject for false certainty." He went around them then, with smaller questions. Quick ones, not long enough to let them build little speeches. Who poured the burgundy? Who mentioned the mayor first? Was the salad served on chilled plates or room temperature? Did Pike use the carving knife or merely stand beside it? Had Bissett entered from the left or the right with the pheasant? The answers scattered like marbles. No one agreed for long. Confidence remained, but it had sprung leaks. Mrs. Lascelles insisted Pike had carved. Mr. Lascelles was sure Bissett had finished the work in the pantry. Vane said Pike told a story about Monte Carlo during the soup. Miss Pike declared it was during cheese, and that it had not been a story but an opinion. Willis remembered the port before the salad, which earned him a glare from Mrs. Vale across the room, though she had not even been speaking to him. Breaker said the fish had been underdone. Mrs. Vale called it perfect. Ordway thought Pike left his napkin folded when he rose. Denby could not remember a napkin at all. After 20 minutes of that, the alibi had not collapsed, but it had become what it really was, not 12 eyes on a man, but 12 contented appetites under the management of a skilled host. At last Wolfe raised a hand. "That will do. You have been useful despite yourselves." Judge Forrester stood. "Mr. Wolfe, before I leave, let me state that I still believe Rowan Pike remained at dinner throughout." Wolfe nodded. "You may believe anything you wish, sir. I only ask that you not mistake belief for sight." The judge went out looking as if he intended to sentence philosophy. The others followed in clumps and pairs, murmuring, irritated, relieved, and hungry for the retelling they would later give their friends. Pike lingered. When the door had closed on the last of them, he faced Wolfe. "You have accomplished very little." "On the contrary," Wolfe said, "I have separated memory from observation. It is a necessary hygiene. You still can't place me anywhere else, number, nor have I tried. I have merely shown that your alibi is upholstered. Pike's mouth tightened. You dislike me, Mr. Wolfe? Yes. That disconcerted him for half a second. He recovered and said, Then we understand one another. No, Wolfe said. I understand you very little. That is the trouble. Pike left. Kramer remained in the red leather chair, staring at the door. All right, he said. That helped. I turned to him. I'm touched. Don't be, he glanced at Wolfe. You haven't cracked him. No, Wolfe said, but his guests are no longer brick. They are pudding. That's something. Kramer got up. I'll keep on Bissett, and that messenger. He went out without another growl, which was as close to gratitude as he usually got without a physician present. I looked at Wolfe. Well, he closed his eyes. They remember being hosted. Yes. Not being observant. Yes. That is valuable. I gathered as much from the pudding. He ignored me. Archie, a dinner is one of civilization's higher contrivances. It occupies the senses, flatters the ego, and discourages vigilance. Mr. Pike used that. Whether he used it to conceal his own movement, to protect another's, or merely to prepare against accusation, remains unsettled. But the guests have shown us something important. The center of the table was not watched. It was assumed. I thought of the dining room at Pike's house, the framed menu, the cook's chalkboard, the small clock marked +5. And now this roomful of people who could all swear to presence, and none of whom had actually kept their eyes on it. Full bellies, I said. Make lazy witnesses. Wolfe opened one eye. Archie, that is almost worth preserving. He rang for Fritz. That was Wolfe too. Once he had stripped certainty off a dozen well-fed people, he naturally wanted dinner. Chapter 6, Marsh and Son, the torn receipt from Belden's wastebasket, did not immediately lead to blood, blackmail, or melodrama. It led, as many important things do in New York, to a shop with tired floors, a bell on the door, and a proprietor who trusted numbers more than faces. The name on the receipt had been incomplete, but Kramer's men had supplied the rest by noon the next day. Marsh and Son, fine provisions and cold storage, on Lexington Avenue near 47th. It was the sort of establishment that served households, which liked their delicacies wrapped discreetly, and their accounts more discreetly still. If you wanted truffles, preserved cherries, game in season, or a cheese with a family history, Marsh and Son would sell it to you, and never discuss your digestion. Wolfe had sent me first, naturally, because shopkeepers are more likely to talk to a man who appears capable of carrying a parcel. But after 10 minutes of hearing my report over the telephone, he decided the matter required his presence. That alone told me he smelled structure in it. So at 3:30 we were standing at the counter of Marsh and Son, while rain shone on the window and a clerk with sighed. Whiskers arranged jars as if posterity had commissioned him. Mr. Marsh himself emerged from the back room when I gave our names. He was spare, elderly, pink about the nose, and had a dry expression that suggested he had long since discovered that customers lied for no reason at all and had ceased to care. You are not buying, he said. No, Wolfe told him. We are inquiring. Worse. He led us to a small office behind the cold room where there was a desk, a ledger, a calendar with a pheasant on it, and a smell of paper, string and butter. There are men who grow old among accounts and become timid. Mr. Marsh had gone the other way. He had learned that any figure written twice could outlast personality. Wolfe sat with visible reluctance in a chair built for humbler ambitions. A receipt was found among the effects of Edwin Belden, he said. It indicated that a packet was to be held until 9 o'clock Wednesday morning. Did your firm receive such a packet? Mr. Marsh folded his hands. We did. That was pleasantly direct. From Belden himself? I asked. Number from a messenger he employed. It was deposited Tuesday evening at 6:35. Held where? Wolfe asked. In our private cold storage vault, Marsh said. Not because it required refrigeration, but because the vault is locked and the key remains with me. Why here? He shrugged. Mr. Belden had dealt with us before. A packet may be safer among invoices than in a desk drawer. What became of it? At 9 o'clock yesterday morning, I was to deliver it to a man presenting the other half of the receipt. Did such a man appear? Wolfe asked. Number Inspector Kramer appeared first. That saved trouble. Did you open the packet? I asked. Certainly not. I am a grocer, not a novelist. Wolfe grunted. You gave it to the police? Yes. What was in it? I am told it contained photostatic copies of financial records, correspondence, and 2 signed memoranda. Nothing edible. That fitted Belden exactly. He had hidden his explosives in a butter cellar. Wolfe nodded. Good. Now, Mr. Marsh. We have another inquiry. Rowan Pike is your customer? A flicker came and went from Marsh's face. Yes, he entertained 12 at dinner on Tuesday. So I understand. What provisions did he purchase for that dinner? Marsh leaned back. You ask as if menus were indictments. Sometimes they are. The old man considered, then reached for a ledger from the desk, not a decorative ledger, like Belden's heavy with insinuation, but a plain business book with dates, names, amounts, and merciful honesty. He opened it and ran a practiced finger down a page. Tuesday morning, Pike household. Oysters, consomme face stock, salmon fillets, 2 pheasants, greens, pears, cheeses, cream, butter, chablis, burgundy, port, also 1 prepared pudding. I looked up. Pudding. Yes, what kind? Chocolate cabinet pudding. That wasn't on the menu, I said. No, Marsh agreed. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Prepared by you, by our kitchen, ready-made, to be heated or served cool. Why would Pike order it if the dessert was pear tart? Marsh turned another page. Because he ordered it separately at 1:12 in the afternoon by telephone and asked that it be entered on the household account, but not included in the dinner card list sent over earlier. Wolfe's brows moved a millimeter. For him, that was astonishment with brass bands. Not included, he repeated. Number? Who gave the instruction? Mr. Pike himself, I said. Did he say why? Number customers rarely explain irregularity. They assume merchants are too tired to notice. Wolfe did not move, and the pudding was delivered. Yes, at 5:20. By whom? My son. He is out just now. Was anything else delivered with it? Marsh consulted the page. Yes, 1 small spirit lamp and a chafing dish insert. That landed squarely, I said, for a pudding. For warming, Mr. Goodwin. That is what spirit lamps are for in the civilized portions of the globe. Did Pike usually hire such equipment? Number Wolfe's fingers drummed once on the chair arm. Did your son carry these himself? Yes. To whom were they given? The butler Bissett. Any instruction? Marsh checked a notation. Yes, Mr. Pike had asked that the pudding be capable of going up quickly, if needed. My son noted the phrase, because he thought it fussy. There it was, not a dessert, but a reserve. Wolfe glanced at me. A device. Yes, sir, Marsh said. If I may ask, what concern can pudding have with murder? An intimate one, perhaps, Wolfe said. He reached for the ledger. May I? You may look, you may not remove. Wolfe scanned the entries. His eyes passed once, then went back. Mr. Marsh, these quantities, 2 pheasants for 12, adequate. 1 prepared pudding in addition to pear tart. Excessive. Was anything returned? Yes. What? Half the tart. And the pudding? Consumed or discarded. Nothing returned. That made it prettier. If the tart had done its duty, the pudding had been used for some other purpose than feeding grateful guests. I asked, would a pudding come up faster than a tart? Mr. Marsh turned to me as a schoolmaster turns to the least impossible boy. Much faster. A tart must be plated, cut, and served properly. A pudding may be spooned at once, particularly if appearance is secondary. Secondary to what? To time. Wolfe shut the ledger gently. For a full minute no one spoke. Outside, through the frosted glass, I could hear the bell at the front door, a customer entering for Stilton or olives or some other innocent thing. In the little office the figures sat there, quiet and complete. Men had contradicted one another all over town, but here the numbers had no nerves. Pike had ordered a dessert, not listed on the menu. A quick one that could be heated and produced without ceremony, and he had done it privately. What for? Wolfe answered my thought aloud. To repair a break in schedule. Marsh blinked, sir. Never mind. He got up, and I did too, but before we could go, Marsh cleared his throat. One more item, he said. Wolfe turned. Tuesday afternoon at 4:40, the Pike account was amended by telephone. In what respect? Wolfe asked. The instruction was that the pudding be sent without the usual label. Why, I was not told. And this also came from Mr. Pike. Yes. I smiled. A shy pudding. Mr. Marsh did not. Back on the sidewalk, with taxis hissing by, and the damp city pretending it had not listened, I said. Well, Wolfe ignored the weather and concentrated on contempt. The dinner was engineered. Yes. The menu upstairs was a script from memory. The kitchen downstairs was run on dual time, and now we have a reserved dessert, privately ordered, quickly heated, easily substituted, and stripped of identification. A harmless kitchen shortcut, I said, unless it isn't. It isn't. He adjusted his scarf with unnecessary violence. Archie, consider. Suppose service fell behind or advanced beyond plan. Suppose the host needed to occupy attention, alter sequence, or create a pause that could be remembered later as another course or incident. A ready-made pudding would do admirably. It can appear suddenly, vanish quickly, and leave a warm recollection without requiring preparation. Especially among people with full bellies. He grunted approval. Moreover, its very irregularity is the point. If the formal menu was to control public memory, the secret pudding was to control private mechanics. I thought it through as we walked toward the corner. Not a dessert then, a patch. Exactly, a device to mend chronology. That was the kind of sentence Wolfe liked enough to keep. I said, Mrs. Dover never mentioned pudding, number which means either she never saw it, which I doubt, or it was handled outside her authority. Bissett, probably, and maybe Pike himself. Wolfe gave me a side glance. At last you are recovering. There was more. The spirit lamp and chafing insert nagged me. A pudding quick to heat, I said, but also something that can keep the pantry busy. Yes, and if the pantry is busy, the host can move. A maid can be sent away. A bell can ring twice and be ignored. And everybody upstairs keeps remembering fish, pheasant, wine, and jokes. Wolfe stopped walking. I nearly bumped him. What? He was staring not at me but at the wet reflection of a traffic light in the pavement, which often meant he was seeing something indoors instead. The fish, he said. What about it? In the kitchen, Mrs. Dover, said Pike, interfered over the sauce. The fish was delayed and then served warm, not hot. If a pause had to be covered, if the service had to be stretched or reset, then an unlisted item prepared below stairs could occupy the butler and alter the household rhythm without the guests above understanding why. A pudding intermission. He resumed walking, do not ornament, but it fits. Yes, it fitted too well. A dinner designed to generate a memory, a hidden dessert designed to rescue the timing if the memory threatened to drift. Pike was not merely feeding people, he was managing a clock by means of appetite. We took a cab back to the brownstone, and during the ride Wolfe closed his eyes while I looked again at the notes. Marsh and Son had done more for us in 20 minutes than 3 distinguished witnesses had done in an hour. Numbers tell a cleaner story than people because numbers do not blush, defend friends, or confuse pheasant with principle. At home, in the office, Wolfe lowered himself into his chair and extended a hand. The guest list, he said. I gave it to him. He looked over the names and then spoke without lifting his eyes. One of them noticed more than the others and has not yet admitted it. That sounds hopeful. It is not hope. It is arithmetic. A device as elaborate as this dinner requires at least one observer with nerves. Which one? We shall see. First, get Kramer. Tell him Marsh and Son confirms a concealed order, a prepared pudding without label with heating apparatus, privately requested by Pike. I reached for the phone. As I dialed, I was thinking that a ready-made pudding is ordinarily a harmless object, though perhaps an insult to pastry. In Pike's house it had become something else, a mechanical part, as important as the 5-minute clock or the framed menu card. It was not food in the ordinary sense. It was a tool, and once food becomes a tool in a murder case, Wolfe grows interested in a dangerous way. He sat with his eyes half shut, one hand on the arm of the chair, as if already arranging the next move. Somewhere in the machinery of Pike's dinner, that shy pudding had been needed, not for taste, not for thrift, and certainly not for hospitality, for timing, which meant that the meal had not only been served, it had been built. Chapter 7. The shape of the pudding. By 9 o'clock that night, Wolfe had reached the point in the case where food was no longer food. It had become chronology with sauce on it. He was in the kitchen at Pike's house, for the third time in 2 days, which was enough to sour any household. Mrs. Dover, the cook, had lost her first indignation and gained a steadier one. Bissett had become so correct, he looked laminated, and Elsie Trent, the maid, had developed the hunted expression of a girl who suspects every tray conceals a question. Pike was there too, he had objected. Wolfe had ignored him. Kramer, who had begun to enjoy the objections on their own merits, stood by the dresser with his hat on the back of his head and let the evening develop. Wolfe planted himself beside the work table and said, "Mrs. Dover, we will discuss dessert." That landed badly. She stared. "Dessert?" "Yes, pear tart. We had tart prepared, and pudding served." Her face hardened. "No, sir, we did not." Wolfe turned his head toward Bissett. "You did." Bissett kept his tone level. "Mr. Wolfe, there was a reserve suite in case of accident." "Ah, at last a noun." "Reserve," Pike said sharply. "This is absurd. Must every kitchen precaution be made sinister?" "No," Wolfe said. "Only those that alter time." He faced Mrs. Dover again. "Did you prepare pear tart for 12? "Yes." "When?" "In the afternoon, baked by 4, rested, glazed and ready, to be served how? Cut and plated with cream." "How long?" She frowned, thinking despite herself, "to portion and plate for 12, 6 minutes if they kept out of my way, 8 if they did not, and if Mr. Bissett attempted elegance." 10, I said. "A dangerous number in this house." Kramer grunted. "Now, Mrs. Dover, if instead of tart one wished to serve a prepared pudding brought in from outside, warmed quickly and spooned onto plates, how long?" Her eyes narrowed. "Less." "How much less?" 3 minutes. 4, and if already heated. 2. Wolfe nodded once. "Thank you." Pike moved from the doorway and came nearer. "What in God's name are you driving at?" Wolfe did not answer him. He looked at the range, then at the shelf, where the small fast clock had stood, then back to Mrs. Dover. "When was dessert served?" She hesitated. "Not long, but enough." "After the cheese," she said. "That is not time, it is sequence." "Around 8, perhaps," Bissett said. 8:10. Mrs. Dover swung toward him. "You don't know. You were running up and down with your own blessed clocks." "That helped," Wolfe said mildly. "And was the dessert hot?" "It was warm," Bissett said. Mrs. Dover snorted. "Hot enough to steam when it left." There was a little silence. Wolfe's eyes rested on her. "Steam?" "Yes." "From tart?" She stared at him, then at the others, and color rose under her cheeks. "Well, no, not from tart. Not like that." "Precisely. Tart may be warmed. It does not arrive breathing." Kramer said, "Hold it. Are you telling me the guests got pudding and thought it was tart?" "No," Wolfe said. "I am telling you they got whatever was convenient to memory, and memory afterward called it what the menu had told it to call it." That was Wolfe at his nastiest. Quiet and exact, he turned to Elsie Trent. You carried dessert? Yes, sir, some of it. What did it look like? The girl swallowed. Brown, sir, I said. Tart is usually not shy about shape. She looked miserable. I only saw plates going out. Round slices? Wolfe asked. No, sir. More like spooned. Mrs. Dover closed her eyes for a second, and when she opened them, she had crossed a line and knew it. I told Bissett it would never pass for tart if anyone looked at it properly. Pike said. You are out of your senses. No, sir, she said, not even looking at him. I am tired of them being rented. Bissett stepped forward. That is intolerable. So is being made a fool in my own kitchen. Wolfe lifted a hand. Enough, Mrs. Dover, who ordered the substitution. She looked at Pike at last. He met it and said, Do not be theatrical. That did it. If there is one thing a competent cook cannot forgive, it is being accused of theatre by a man who has been staging dinner with 2 clocks and a hidden pudding. You did, she said. You came down after the cheese and told Bissett to send the tart nowhere and warm the other thing. Said it would save time. Pike's face changed. Not much, but enough for anybody with eyes. I said no such thing. Yes, sir, you did. And I asked why, when the tart was ready, and you said guests remember sweetness, not pastry. Wolfe's head turned a fraction. He had found his sentence. Did he say that? He asked. Bissett spoke too quickly. Mr. Pike only meant. No, Wolfe snapped. You have meant enough for 3 days. He sat back, one hand on the chair arm, the other touching his lips. When he spoke again, it was not to the servants or to Pike, but to Kramer, as if the room had already yielded what it had. The shape of the pudding is the shape of the lie. A true final course, prepared from the menu given the guests, would have required the sequence Mrs. Dover described. Tart cut, plated, cream added, service paste. Instead, a substitute was introduced. Quick to heat, quick to spoon, impossible to mistake in the kitchen, but easy to rename in memory afterward. That means the meal was bent to fit a missing stretch of time. Kramer nodded slowly. He had it now, Wolfe continued. The guests remember dessert because they were told, by the menu and by expectation, what dessert ought to have been. They did not observe it closely because they were full, content, and engaged. But below stairs the mechanics are plain. A prepared pudding could reach the table in 2 or 3 minutes, hotter and faster than tart. It creates an artificial gain in schedule. I said, it buys time. Yes. How much? Not enough by itself to travel downtown and back, Kramer growled. No, Wolfe said, do not leap, but enough to cover disorder, enough to repair a gap, enough to let a host alter the rhythm of the house without the dining room understanding why. He turned to Pike then. And only you, Mr. Pike, had authority to change both the menu and the story around it. Pike had gone very still. He was good at stillness. Men who live by control often are. But there are kinds of stillness. One is composure, another is calculation. This was neither. This was the stillness of a man watching something expensive crack. At worst, he said, you have shown that I altered dessert. No, Wolfe replied. At worst I have shown that your dinner was a mechanism. The menu was arranged to guide recollection. The kitchen was run on false time. The staff was moved like scenery. And when the final course threatened delay, you replaced it with a faster one, and relied on your guests to remember what they had been told to expect. Pike's one-sided smile tried to return and failed. That still does not make me a murderer. Of course not. Murder is a larger question, but it makes you the author of deception in your own house, and I do not think you wrote only 1 chapter. No one spoke after that. In the kitchen the range gave off its steady heat, and somewhere overhead a floorboard creaked in the expensive silence of the house. Mrs. Dover stood with both hands on the table edge as if steadying herself. Elsie Trent stared at the plates. Bissett had become pale in a careful way. I looked at the work table and saw it as Wolfe saw it. Not flour, copper, knives and crocks, but a machine for turning appetite into evidence. The final course had been the flaw in the machine, because dessert is supposed to relax things. People remember dinners backward from sweetness. Pike had counted on that. He had also counted on nobody caring whether sweetness arrived sliced or spooned. He had been wrong because Nero Wolfe cared. Wolfe got to his feet. "Mr. Kramer, I suggest you keep Mr. Pike available." Kramer said, "Gladly." Pike laughed then, a short sound with no mirth in it. "On pudding." Wolfe adjusted his cuffs. Number on control, pudding merely gave it shape. We left him in the kitchen with his servants, his clocks and the remains of his hospitality. In the cab back to 35th Street, I said, "You've got him near something now." Wolfe shut his eyes. "Yes, but not yet the knife." "Number." "Then what?" "The missing stretch of time, Archie. We now know it existed. Someone bent dinner to accommodate it. The question is whether Pike used that interval with his own hands, or whether he created it for someone else." I looked out at the wet city sliding by in lamps and reflections. The shape of the pudding, I thought, was indeed the shape of the lie, soft, convenient, and designed to go down without resistance. But once you looked at it as evidence instead of dessert, it stood there in plain view, too fast, too hot, too helpful, and in a Nero Wolfe case, anything too helpful is doomed. Chapter 8. The rear passage, a New York house that entertains expensively, is like a swan. What shows in front is composure, and what works behind is feet. Pike's front hall, his drawing room, his dining room, with the framed menu and obedient silver, all belonged to the swan. Wolfe, having done with the feathers, wanted the feet. So at 10 o'clock the next morning, we went again to East 64th Street. This time, not by the front bell, but by the service entrance in the mews lane behind the house. Kramer was with us, which improved matters for everyone except Pike. The rear of the house had none of the limestone calm of the front. There were ash cans, a coal chute, damp brick, kitchen odors, and the narrow passage by which all the honorable labor of the establishment moved unseen. A side door opened on a flagged corridor, running from the kitchen toward the front stairs, with another branch leading past the pantry to a small yard gate. If you were a guest upstairs, you would never know the passage existed. If you were a servant, it was the bloodstream of the house. Wolfe stood in it, frowned at the brick walls, and turned in a slow circle. "Well," I said. He pointed. "Kitchen there, pantry here, service stairs to the basement and up to the rear landing. Yard gate to the lane. Front hall not visible from any point unless one rounds that corner." Kramer nodded. "A man could move in and out without crossing the dining room." "Yes," Wolfe said, "and without any guest seeing more than a butler's elbow." We walked it. From the pantry to the yard gate was 19 steps, 20 for Wolfe. From the gate into the lane, 6 more. The lane itself ran behind 3 houses and came out on the side street half a block away. There was no reason a guest upstairs should hear a latch click or a shoe on stone if a servant below chose his moment and opened for him. Pike came down the passage as we were measuring it with our feet. He had apparently abandoned hope that outrage would keep us out, but not hope that style might keep him afloat. "This is becoming intolerable," he said. "No," Wolfe told him. "Toleration has already gone too far," Kramer said. "Save it. I want the exact path you used last Tuesday, if you went out this way." Pike gave him a dead stare. I did not. "That answer is getting threadbare," I said. Wolfe ignored us and addressed Bissett, who had appeared behind Pike like a formal shadow. "Who customarily used this passage during dinner service?" "The staff, sir." "And Mr. Pike?" "Rarely, sir. Yet he came below during service." Bissett's face remained smooth. Briefly, enough to reach the gate. "No, sir." "That is not what I asked." Bissett did not answer. Wolfe moved past him and examined the yard gate. It was narrow, iron, and fitted with a spring latch that shut softly. On the inside wall beside it was a hook where a key might hang. There was no key now. "Locked at night?" Wolfe asked. "Yes," said Bissett. "When? After the household retires." "Not during dinner?" "No, sir. Deliveries sometimes come." "Excellent," Wolfe said. "Convenience is a generous thing." He had me try the latch 3 times. It made almost no sound. Even Kramer, who was listening with the appetite of a hangman, had to admit it. We went out into the lane. It was narrow enough for gossip to scrape both walls and damp enough to keep it. Across from Pike's yard gate was a garage entrance with a small office built beside it. A man in shirt-sleeves was polishing the windshield of a taxicab. Kramer went to him first. The man looked us over and decided at once that truth would be cheaper than delay. "Name?" Kramer asked. "Dugan." "You drive nights?" "Often enough." "Were you here Tuesday evening around 7:30? Dugan wiped his hands on a rag. Might have been won't do." He squinted at us. "Who's asking?" "Police," Kramer said. "And trouble." That settled his civic spirit. "Yeah, I was here. Had a fare into the lane for the Cartwright house, but they'd already gone out, so I waited a minute." "Did you see anyone leave Pike's rear gate?" Wolfe asked. Dugan looked at him and then at me, as if deciding which of us was decorative. He chose wrong and answered Wolfe. "Yeah." A man came out. Pike's head turned sharply. It was the first unpracticed movement I had seen from him in hours. "What man?" Kramer barked. Well, dressed, dark overcoat. Hat pulled down, came quick, looked both ways, and asked if I was free. "Time?" Wolfe asked. Dugan scratched his chin. 7:30, maybe a little after. "Maybe," Kramer growled. There was a church clock striking the half when he got in. "That's why I remember." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Where did he go?" "Bell Street first." That made me blink. Bell Street lay 2 blocks west and was the quickest cut toward the avenue where cabs could take the downtown route without attracting notice from anyone in Pike's front rooms. It also happened to be the way you would go if you wanted to shake the geography of one house before entering the traffic of the city. "Bell Street," Kramer repeated. "Then where?" "After that," he told me, downtown, fast as I could manage. "To Riddle Street?" I asked. Dugan shook his head. "Didn't say. Told me Bell Street, then east, then downtown. I let him out near the corner of Bleecker and Hudson. That was not Riddle Street, but it was close enough to confuse a route and still reach Lower Manhattan by foot or another car. Pike had brains enough for layered travel." "Describe him," Wolfe said. Dugan looked at Pike, then away from him. "Medium build, good coat gloves, voice like..." He stopped. "Like what?" Kramer snapped. "Like a man used to being answered." I nearly smiled. That fitted half the men in town, and one especially well. Pike said evenly, "You cannot identify me from that." Dugan shrugged. "Didn't say I could, but you might," Wolfe murmured. "If he spoke again." Dugan looked at him. "Maybe." Kramer took over then, asking details with the efficient brutality of a man who means to pin memory to a wall before it escapes. Had the passenger carried anything? Number had he seemed hurried? Yes, but quiet about it. Had he returned? Dugan had not seen him come back, but he had left the lane with another fare 10 minutes later. Wolfe let Kramer work. He had already gotten what he wanted. The route existed, the gate was usable, and a driver had placed a well-dressed man leaving Pike's rear way at exactly the wrong hour. "On the walk back to the yard gate," Pike said. "This is ridiculous. Half the men in New York wear dark coats." "Yes," Wolfe said. "Fortunately, not all of them emerge from your service gate during a rehearsed alibi." Pike's mouth tightened. "You still have no proof it was I." "No," Wolfe agreed. "But I no longer require imagination." Inside the passage again, Wolfe stopped midway between pantry and gate. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Suppose the host leaves table briefly during the fish, alters the kitchen tempo, reaches this passage under cover of service, exits by the gate, takes a cab to Bell Street, shifts route downtown, performs some errand, and returns before dessert, relying on a managed sequence upstairs to preserve his apparent continuity." I said. "It stops sounding like fantasy." "Indeed," Kramer muttered. "It sounds like murder." Wolfe shook his head. "Number, it sounds like opportunity. Do not outrun your shoes." That was fair. The trip, as we now had it, was narrow and dangerous, but possible, too possible. The dinner no longer looked merely like social insulation. It looked built around a window small, exact, and concealed inside the mechanics of fish, pheasant, and a convenient pudding at the front of the house. Before we left, Wolfe paused in Pike's hall and looked back through the doorway toward the unseen rear passage. "Mr. Pike," he said, "your dinner guests protected nothing. They merely occupied the front of your house while the back remained available. There is a difference." Pike said nothing. We went out. In the cab home, I looked at my notes. Rear gate, silent latch, unlocked during service. Passage concealed from guests. Cabman, Bell Street, downtown detour. All of it fitted too cleanly into the machine Wolfe had been building from menu cards, clocks, pudding, and frightened servants. "The dinner party doesn't look like protection now," I said. "No," Wolfe replied. "It looks like cover for a narrow trip to murder." He opened his eyes and looked at me. Perhaps, or for a narrow trip connected to murder. We must still determine what happened at Belden's office, who expected whom, and why Belden prepared his packet for the morning. But the house has confessed one thing: it was arranged to conceal movement. I looked out at the wet city moving past in grey light and dirty shine. A grand house always has a back way. Coal goes in, ashes come out. Servants pass. Deliveries are made, and gentlemen who prefer not to be seen can become shadows for 10 minutes at a time. Pike had counted on that old urban fact. He had wrapped the front of his evening in candles, guests, and conversation, while the rear remained practical, silent, and useful. If he had gone out that gate, the dinner had not failed him. It had done exactly what it was designed to do. Chapter 9. What Hale knew by Friday morning, the case had reached the stage Wolfe likes best and I like least. The stage where facts begin to fit one another so neatly that you can feel the remaining hole in the center like a draft under a door. We had the dinner shaped into a mechanism, the rear passage turned into opportunity, and Pike standing under a timetable he had plainly helped construct. What we did not yet have was the thing a jury, a policeman, and even a private detective occasionally insist on having before breakfast: motive with bones on it. Wolfe got that at 11:30 from a page that had been missing all along. Kramer brought it himself, which told me at once that it mattered. He came in red, faced from wind, carrying an envelope and an expression like a man who has just swallowed the answer and found it edged. "We got lucky," he said. "You got competent. Sit down." Kramer tossed the envelope on the desk. The missing ledger leaves, or one of them, found in a safe deposit box Belden rented under another name. Wolfe's eyes moved. Which name? Martin Hale. That landed properly. I said, "So MH wasn't another client?" "No," Kramer growled. It was him. Edwin Belden had been Martin Hale before he improved himself. Changed it 15 years ago, legal enough, kept the old name for side arrangements. Wolfe nodded. "Sensibly foolish. Show me." Kramer handed over the sheet. It was a photostat of a ledger page, closely written and marked in Belden's precise hand across the top. In smaller letters than the entries themselves was a note: "Hale private board matter. Retain against denial." I moved closer. There were columns of figures, dates, transfers, and cross. References to account numbers I didn't know. But 3 names appeared often enough to tell their own story: Rowan Pike, Dorrance Civic Relief Fund, and Bella Manufacturing. "Bella," I said. "Failing business." "Failed," Kramer said. "Or nearly. Pike had an interest in it through 2 holding companies." Wolfe read the page twice, then laid it flat and touched one entry with a thick forefinger. "Here, charitable subscriptions received by the Dorrance Fund, diverted in 3 installments through Meerford Holdings, then advanced to Bella as temporary bridge financing." Bridge to what? Bankruptcy. Kramer nodded. "That's what my boys got from the bank records this morning." "And Pike was chairman of the Dorrance board?" Wolfe asked. "Vice chairman in practice, chairman in manners. He handled the donor committee. Respectable as church silver." I said, until the church silver starts a machine shop. Kramer ignored me. There's more. Hale Belden was treasurer for 6 months before they eased him out. Looks like he kept copies after Pike told him to destroy them. Wolfe's eyes went back to the top of the sheet. Retain against denial. Yes, he was holding a pistol to Pike's credit. That was Belden, or Hale, whichever name you preferred for a dead blackmailer. He had kept the evidence not out of virtue, but as collateral, but collateral is still explosive. Board matter, I said. What board? Kramer reached into the envelope and produced another paper. Minute's notice. Emergency board meeting of the Dorrance Civic Relief Fund, Wednesday 9:30 a.m. at the Lexington Club. I looked at the date, the morning after the murder. Hale meant to expose him at breakfast, I said. Board meeting, not breakfast, Kramer snapped. Breakfast for that crowd. Board meeting for the newspapers. Wolfe lifted his head. Who called it? Not Pike. A woman named Mrs. Annis Corbett. Board member. She says Hale telephoned her Tuesday at 5:45, asked that the meeting be assembled, and said he had proof of a diversion of funds that would ruin Pike if it wasn't confronted before noon Wednesday. There it was. The room changed around it the way rooms do when motive arrives and sits down. Until then, murder is timing, roots, lies, and wounds. Afterward, it becomes personal economy. Pike had not merely quarreled with a broker. He had been facing ruin at daybreak. Hale expected trouble, Wolfe said. Kramer grunted. He told Corbett that if anything happened to him overnight, the papers will still reach the right table. I said. Hence Marsh and Son. Yes. Wolfe sat back. And the packet seized at Marsh contained copies of these records, along with 2 memoranda signed by Hale, summarizing the diversion and naming Pike. Good. Wolfe closed his eyes for a second. Very good. That meant it was bad for Pike. I took the photostat and read more closely. The entries were ugly in a refined way. Donations made after a winter relief appeal had gone into the fund, under proper headings, and then slipped sideways through corporate names already familiar from Belden's office: Mereford Holdings, Alton Maritime, Bella, Manufacturing. Each movement had been made to look temporary, each repayment postponed, each notation disguised with the sort of civilized language by which men steal from widows while wearing dinner clothes. And beside the last entry, in Hale's small exact script, were 4 words. Pike cannot survive audit. That was enough to make even Kramer quiet. So, I said, the murder wasn't born at the dinner table. No, Wolfe said. It was prepared there. He stood, which meant he was thinking vigorously enough to require his feet. He crossed to the globe, put a hand on South America without looking at it, and turned back, Archie stated. Yes, sir, Hale, formerly Belden, had proof that Pike diverted charitable funds into Bella Manufacturing, a failing concern in which Pike had a hidden interest. Hale called an emergency board meeting for Wednesday morning and arranged for documents to survive him through Marsh and Son. Pike learns or suspects that exposure is coming. He cannot permit Hale to reach morning alive. Therefore, he requires 2 things by Tuesday night: Hale dead before breakfast, and himself wrapped in witnesses before suspicion can rise. Wolfe nodded. Tolerable, Kramer said. More than tolerable. It's motive. Yes, Wolfe said. Now it matches the broken timeline. That was the point. The dinner no longer floated by itself as a strange social exercise. It locked into the rest. Pike had not staged memory out of vanity. He had staged it because he needed a shield assembled in advance. The courses, the false clock, the concealed pudding, the rear passage, the cab, the narrow trip downtown. All of it now stood behind a reason, powerful enough to justify murder in the mind of a man who valued reputation above law and comfort above both. Did Hale tell anyone else? Wolfe asked. Kramer said, maybe Corbett. Says he hinted 2 other board members should come prepared for a shock. They're being checked. Check faster. Kramer bristled. Don't order me. Then do it voluntarily, I said. What about Pike knowing the meeting had been called? Kramer tapped the notice. Corbett says Pike was telephoned around 6:15 and informed there would be a special board session Wednesday morning. No details. Just that attendance was essential. Wolfe's lips moved. Enough. If Hale had already threatened him, Pike would understand. He had from 6:15 onward to decide whether fraud, disgrace, and likely prison were preferable to murder. Apparently he is not a philosopher. I looked again at the sheet. Bell Street, I said. Kramer turned. What about it? The cabman said the passenger wanted Bell Street first. Then, downtown Bella, Bell Street. Pike liked route confusion. The same mind that hides money in holding companies would hide travel in detours. Wolfe gave me a glance, speculative, but not idiotic. Praise again, a rich week. He returned to his chair and folded his hands. Mr. Kramer, you now have fraud, embezzlement of charitable funds, impending exposure, a concealed packet of evidence, a staged alibi, a possible secret route, and a cabman placing a well-dressed man leaving Pike's rear gate at the crucial hour. You may arrest him if you enjoy gestures. Kramer scowled. You think it's too soon? Yes. Why, motive's there. Motive is plentiful. Murder is singular. Kramer swore softly. You still think he might have set the stage for somebody else? I think nothing yet excludes it. The dinner could conceal Pike's own absence, or cover the movement of an accomplice, or create a climate of certainty into which later lies would settle. We need the final connection who received Hale's hand, delivered note at 6, who was expected for the packet, and whether Pike himself went to Riddle Street, or merely built a house in which another person could vanish. That sobered even him. He rose, took back the envelope, then paused. There's one more thing. Mrs. Corbett says Hale sounded almost cheerful on the phone, said, by tomorrow morning Rowan Pike will either be finished or very busy. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Cheerful men are careless. Busy men are dangerous. Kramer nodded and went out. When the front door had shut, I looked at Wolfe. Now what? Now, he said, we collect the last omitted person. Who? The one who knew enough of Pike's fear, Hale's leverage, and the mechanics of that house to connect them. Someone saw or heard more than has yet been admitted. Bissett? Perhaps. More likely someone Pike underestimated. He underestimates nearly everyone. I thought of the dinner guests, the servants, the rear gate, the scorched envelope, Marsh and Son, and the board meeting notice, lying like a pistol under the whole affair. It was all there now, except the hand itself. Hale had known too much. He had proof of charitable money siphoned into a dying business. He had arranged to expose Pike in the morning. Pike had responded not with argument, but architecture, witnesses, menu, timing, cover. The murder had not started over soup or fish or pheasant. But course by course, the dinner had been built to make it possible. Wolfe reached for the bell to summon Fritz. That was inevitable. He had motive at last, and motive always improves his appetite. As for me, I sat with my notes and looked at the dead man's two names, Edwin Belden in his office, Martin Hale in his private ledger, both now serving the same purpose. Whatever name he had used, he had meant Pike to face ruin at daybreak. Instead, he had met a knife in the dark. But now Wolfe had what he needed to close the distance between fraud and murder, between dinner and death, between the man at the head of the table and the man on the office carpet. The next move would hurt someone badly. That much was certain. Chapter 10. The last course. Wolfe insisted the final gathering be held at Pike's house. That was not sentiment. It was geometry. If the lie was built there, he said, it should collapse there. So on Saturday evening, a little after 8, the same dining room that had carried silver, obedience, and false confidence received company again. This time there were no flowers, no oysters, no fish, and no pretense that the gathering had anything to do with pleasure. The long table stood bare except for candles and water glasses. Wolfe sat at one end in a chair, reinforced by dignity, if not by carpentry. I had my notebook. Kramer was present, broad and patient in the way policemen become when they can smell handcuffs. Rowan Pike sat halfway down on the right, composed enough to insult marble. Bissett stood near the sideboard. Mrs. Dover and Elsie Trent had been persuaded downstairs, but near enough to be called. The dinner guests were there too, or most of them. Judge Forrester, Mrs. Vale, Dr. Breaker, Eleanor Sloane, the Lassells pair, Demby, Ordway, Neff, Willis, Vane, and Miss Pike, who had accepted murder as a family inconvenience and meant to see it properly resolved. The room had an odd quality that night. It remembered itself. You could feel the previous Tuesday hanging over it like a smell under polish. Wolfe let them settle. Then he put both hands on the table and said, "Good evening." On Tuesday night, Edwin Belden, also known as Martin Hale, was murdered in his office on Riddle Street. He had in his possession proof that Rowan Pike had diverted charitable funds into a failing business and intended to expose that fraud at a board meeting Wednesday morning. Mr. Pike therefore had motive of the strongest kind. Not anger, but ruin. Pike said coolly, "This is slander." "No," Wolfe said. "That part is accountancy." Kramer smiled without warmth. Wolfe continued, "The problem was not motive. The problem was opportunity. Mr. Pike had arranged a dinner here for 12. His guests have testified that he was present throughout. At first that seemed inconvenient, then it became interesting. The menu was remembered too well. The incidents at table were repeated too precisely. The kitchen ran on 2 clocks. A maid was sent away at a critical time. A reserve pudding, not printed on the menu, was secretly ordered and heated for use. A rear passage and yard gate allowed movement from this house unseen by the guests. Finally, a cabman placed a well-dressed man leaving that gate at approximately 7:30 on Tuesday evening. There was a small stir at that. Pike did not move. Wolfe turned his head toward the guests. "You were not false witnesses. You were guided witnesses. That is an important distinction. You remembered being hosted. You did not observe continuously. Mr. Pike relied on that." Judge Forrester stiffened. "Sir," Wolfe lifted a hand. "Please, I am not insulting you. I am describing dinner." A few of them looked offended anyway. He went on. "Now we come to the last course. On the printed menu, dessert was pear tart. Mrs. Dover prepared pear tart. Such a dessert requires cutting, plating, cream, and orderly service. Yet the timing claimed afterward for the meal, and the heat recalled below stairs, do not fit pear tart. Instead, a prepared pudding, secretly purchased from Marsh & Son with a spirit lamp, and sent without label, was substituted because it could be heated at once and served in 2 or 3 minutes. Mrs. Vale stared. "Pudding." "Yes," Wolfe said. "You may have eaten it without marking the exchange clearly. You expected the final sweet named on the card and received a hot dessert instead. Later, memory supplied the printed name and smoothed over the difference." Dr. Breaker muttered, "Good Lord." Wolfe nodded. "Exactly, the dessert could not have arrived when everyone later claimed, unless it was a substitute. That contradiction matters because it proves the meal was bent to fit a missing stretch of time." He turned his gaze slowly and let it rest on Pike. And only one man had power to alter the menu. The service, the servants, the clocks, and the story told afterward. Pike's mouth moved at one corner. "You have shown only household management." "Number, I have shown authorship, but authorship alone does not kill a man." He leaned back slightly. The remaining question was whether Mr. Pike himself went to Riddle Street, or whether he built a cover for someone else. I now know the answer. That sharpened the room like a knife being lifted. I knew it too by then, because Wolfe had told me an hour earlier, after making me fetch one more person. He looked toward the doorway. "Archie." I rose, went out, and returned with Julia Raines. That landed harder than any speech could have. Pike's eyes changed for the first time since I had met him. Not much, but enough. Julia came in with her head high, pale but steady, and took the chair I had placed for her near the foot of the table. Miss Pike made a small sound of surprise. Eleanor Sloane closed her eyes briefly. Kramer did not move. Wolfe said, "Miss Raines was Mr. Belden's former secretary. She knew of Pike's dealings with him, though not all the details. More important, Mr. Pike knew that she despised Belden and had no fixed alibi for Tuesday evening. He also knew she was intelligent enough to react strongly if informed of Belden's death. Julia looked straight at Pike. "Yes," Pike said, "this is absurd." Wolfe ignored him. Shortly after 6 o'clock Tuesday evening, Belden received a hand-delivered note. It was placed in the scorched envelope found in his office. Harry Munn took it in to him. The note was not from Pike. Julia spoke very quietly. "It was from me." There was silence. Kramer said, "Tell it." She nodded once. "At 5:30 Tuesday, Pike telephoned me. He said Belden had decided to make terms with me and wished to speak before leaving the office. I did not trust him, but I thought it possible Belden had become frightened. Pike said I should not be seen entering openly because Belden wanted no clerk present. He told me to send a note first and come by the side entrance to the building at 6:45. Mrs. Vale gasped as if Manners had been stabbed. Julia went on. "I sent the note by messenger. Then I went. Belden was alive when I reached him. He was agitated and angry and said at once that Pike had trapped us both." Pike said sharply, "Lies." "No," Julia said, still looking at him. "He told me he had proof against you and that you had somehow learned he meant to expose you in the morning. He said if anything happened to him, documents would reach the Dorrance board. He also said he had been a fool to involve me." Wolfe nodded. Belden expected Pike, not as a caller, but as a threat orbiting nearby. That is why he prepared the packet at Marsh and Son. Kramer said, "You left out one thing before." "Why?" Julia's hands tightened in her lap. "Because when Belden heard steps in the outer office, he pushed me into the file alcove behind the curtain. That did it." Pike half rose. "This is manufactured." "Sit down," Kramer barked. He sat. Julia continued, "From the alcove I could not see the door, but I heard Pike's voice. He was very calm. Belden was not. Pike said the board meeting would destroy more than one man and asked for the papers. Belden refused. There was a struggle. I heard the desk strike the wall and then Belden choking. When I came out, Pike was gone. No one breathed loudly enough to count." "You saw him?" Wolfe asked. "Number not fully. Only his coat as he turned through the outer office, but I knew the voice." Pike laughed once. A dry cracking sound. A voice, convenient. Wolfe said, "Not alone. You left by the stairs, Miss Raines, terrified and foolish, believing you would be suspected if discovered. You told no one later. When Harry Munn telephoned that Belden was dead, you came to me because you recognized the trap, but still hoped Pike could be reached through his alibi." Julia closed her eyes once. "Yes," Kramer said. "You should have told me that on the first night." "Yes," she said, "I know." Wolfe turned to the table. Miss Raines's silence was culpable, but understandable. More important, it completes the structure. Pike needed Hale dead before Wednesday morning. He had already constructed witnesses here. He manipulated the timing of dinner course by course, used the rear passage and gate to leave unseen, took a cab via Bell Street downtown, confronted Belden in expectation of seizing the papers, killed him when Belden refused, and returned in time for the altered dessert and the closing sequence of his performance. Pike's face had gone bloodless now, though his voice tried for contempt. This is fantasy stitched together from servants, pudding, and a frightened woman. Wolfe shook his head. Number from control. Everything in this case bears your touch. The printed menu left unchanged though the hour was advanced. The butler instructed to use a second clock, marked 5 minutes fast. The maid sent away. The reserve pudding secretly ordered to save time if the schedule slipped. The rear gate left available, the cabman, the fraudulent transfers, the impending board meeting. Belden's packet prepared against your denial, and now Miss Raines's note, which lured her to the office and gave Belden advance warning of a visitor he misread. Each part by itself may be argued. Together they form a machine, and you are the only man in it with hands on every lever. Pike said nothing. Wolfe leaned forward. There is one final point. You believed time could be commanded. You treated your guests as markers, your servants as gears, and your courses as signals. You assumed that if enough people remembered fish at 1 hour and dessert at another, the evening itself would obey you. But time is not a servant, Mr. Pike. It records, your substitute dessert broke the menu broke the chronology. The chronology broke your alibi. For the first time, the room felt less like a dining room than a courtroom that had forgotten to change furniture. Miss Pike spoke into the silence. "Rowan," he turned his head toward her with visible effort. "Be quiet." That was enough for Kramer. He stood. "No," Pike said sharply, rising too. "This is preposterous." Goodwin brought in a hysterical woman and Wolfe wrapped a lecture around her. Then he made the mistake that finishes many men. He reached for dignity instead of escape, soon enough and for escape too late. His hand went toward his pocket. Kramer was on him before cloth had settled. Vane jumped back. Mrs. Vale squealed. Judge Forrester shouted. A chair overturned. In 3 seconds, Pike's arm was twisted behind him, and a small automatic lay on the carpet. Kramer, breathing hard but pleased, said, "That helps." Pike did not answer. There was nothing left in his face now but calculation ruined by fact. Julia Raines had not moved. Wolfe settled back in his chair and closed his eyes. To anyone who did not know him, he might have appeared merely tired. I knew better. He was through. The case had been solved, arranged, and served. Anything after that was cleanup. Kramer took Pike away with a plainclothesman who had been waiting in the hall. The guests departed in fragments, shocked, excited, and already storing the thing for retelling. Miss Pike left without once looking back. Eleanor Sloane paused long enough to touch Julia's shoulder. Mrs. Dover came to the doorway, saw enough, and said only, "I knew no good would come of that pudding." After the house had emptied and quiet had taken hold again, Wolfe got to his feet with the labor of a monument deciding to travel. "In the cab home, I said, you might have warned me you were going to spring Julia at the end. Number, you enjoy these moments too much. Number, yes, you do." He opened one eye. "Archie, when a man builds an alibi out of courses and candles, it is fitting that he choke on dessert." That was good enough to preserve. Back at the brownstone, Fritz had supper waiting, because civilization, unlike murder, has standards. Wolfe went to the dining room without another word. I lingered in the office a minute, looking at my notes. The whole thing had started in fog and rain, with a wealthy broker dead on Riddle Street, and a dinner party shining uptown like polished innocence. In the end, the truth had returned to the table where the lie first took shape. The witnesses had not been corrupt, only comfortable. The servants had not been wicked, only managed. The meal had been engineered, but its very neatness had betrayed it. A host may command courses, wine, servants, candles, and the pace of conversation. He may even for a little while command what his guests think they remember. But he cannot command time. Time is the one guest that never flatters, never forgets, and never leaves before the last course.